Lobbies and gentlegrams, from platinum plaques to private jets, Diddy danced with danger and dodged regrets. But now the parties have paused and the feds have come with flashbangs, files, and futures undone. Once the king of clubs and the charts crowned champ, now he's caught in a case that's cold, dark, and damp. Sex, silence, and stars in the shadows, a saga of secrets, subpoenas, and scandals. And at the center of it all, a federal trial now underway, with evidence mounting and immunity frayed. This isn't just drama or daytime TV. It's a deep, disturbing dive into hip-hop royalty's history. So let's unravel the empire, expose what lies beneath, and unpack whether this trial will leave Diddy free or behind bars for eternity. Now let's take it all the way back to really understand the gravity of the situation. See, ever since Sean Diddy Combs stepped on the scene in the 1990s, he was hailed as hip-hop royalty, throwing platinum parties, dating Jennifer Lopez, and shaping the sound of a generation. But today, the same man is at the center of a sweeping federal investigation, and what built up as decades worth of whispers within the industry has now become a full-blown federal case that could rival R. Kelly or Epstein in scope. See, Diddy has been a controversial figure since the day he entered Hollywood. In the 1990s, he was caught in the crossfire of the East and West Coast rap feud, and after Tupac Shakur was hit with a firearm in 1994, he publicly accused both Biggie Smalls and Diddy of having advanced knowledge of the ambush. And Diddy's brush with the law continued beyond the world of hip-hop. In December of 1999, Diddy and his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez were present at a New York nightclub when a shootout occurred. Diddy and his bodyguard were detained, but he was later acquitted of all firearm charges. Later on, he quietly settled civil claims by the victims. And we would watch Diddy do the exact same thing over 2 decades later, when in November of 2023, we saw his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, file a civil lawsuit against Diddy, accusing him of ape, physical abuse, and coercion into trafficking over their decade-long relationship. The lawsuit was settled out of court just 1 day later, but what began as the end of a shocking civil lawsuit would soon spiral into something far more devastating, igniting a federal investigation that would crack open the darkest secrets of Diddy's empire and mark the beginning of his most perilous downfall. In September of 2024, Diddy was arrested and indicted in a Manhattan hotel. The indictment covered alleged crimes from 2004 to 2018 and included racketeering, trafficking, and transportation for PR prostitution. Staff members, including assistants and bodyguards, are accused of helping cover up the abuse by cleaning rooms, handling travel logistics, and paying workers in cash. During a 2024 raid, federal agents reportedly found over 1,000 bottles of lubricant and baby oil in Diddy's homes, as well as modified AR-15 firearms. So let's break down everything Diddy is accused of, jail time he's facing if found guilty, how his defense team can help Diddy walk away a free man, and all the horrifying stories we've heard from Cassie Ventura throughout the week-long testimony that she's given. Front to back, this video is going to cover every single aspect of the Diddy trial. So if you want a full comprehensive view of everything that's going down, you're in the right place. Now, to fully understand the gravity of what's at stake for Diddy and for the assault victims within this trial, let's take it all the way back to understand exactly what Diddy is accused of, what he needs to prove to the jury in order to walk away a free man, and what the United States federal government needs to prove against him to lock Diddy up, possibly for the rest of his life. Now, there are 3 main charges that Diddy is facing. Number 1 is racketeering conspiracy, aka RICO. This accuses Diddy of using his various businesses, like his music business, his fashion business, his alcohol business, as an organized criminal enterprise to commit crimes like forced labor, kidnapping, arson, drug dealing, and abuse. In short, the prosecutors allege that Diddy ran his companies like a racketeering syndicate that protected and funded his crimes. Diddy's also accused of trafficking through force, fraud, and coercion, and prosecutors are alleging that he lured and coerced women into performing commercial acts against their will. Simply, this means arranging or forcing PR prostitutes or non-consenting women to have often by using money, drugs, career promises, or violence. And the final main charge against Diddy is transportation for PR prostitution. This charge alleges that Diddy paid staff to move victims across state and country lines with the intent that they engage in PR prostitution. In other words, he's accused of sending women or S workers to hotels or clubs outside of New York so they could be used for paid S. And this is going to be a long video where we break down literally every aspect of the trial. So when I say S, I'm talking about SEX. Now, according to the indictments, Diddy and his associates allegedly ran quote-unquote highly orchestrated S parties called freak-offs at luxury hotels. These events were stocked with drugs, lubricant, and special lighting for the purpose of filming S performances. Diddy's staff allegedly booked rooms and brought women there, sometimes moving commercial S workers across state or national lines to participate. The charges claim that Diddy himself attended obviously many of these F-offs and used force and threats to control victims. For example, one indictment excerpt alleges that Combs hit, kicked, and dragged victims by their hair, causing serious injuries. He then purposely taped these acts on camera and used the recordings to intimidate victims into silence. Staff members like chauffeurs, assistants, and bodyguards are accused of maintaining the cover-up, cleaning up hotel rooms after the parties, arranging travel, and even delivering cash to pay the S workers. To put it simply, prosecutors are saying that Diddy abused his power. They alleged he would coerce women by dangling career support or money and using intimidation or violence if they resisted. Some of the women involved were reportedly his employees or romantic partners, making them financially dependent. Investigators say the pattern has spanned for years. One federal report notes the allegations go back as far as 2008. Key witnesses within the trial that we will break down include, of course, Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend, who testified about years of abuse, forced participation in the F-offs, and threats involving explicit videos. Along with Cassie, another key witness is another one of Diddy's Bad Boy Records artists, Don Richard, who corroborated instances of physical abuse, and other key witnesses include hotel security guards and male S workers who supported claims of violent behavior and visible injuries on victims. And while the odds are stacked against Diddy, he's most definitely not going out without a fight. Diddy has hired a dream team of lawyers and attorneys, all of them ranging in decades of experience and high-profile cases. The lead defense attorney is Mark Agnifilo, with over 30 years of experience, fighting in over 200 plus cases, and notable cases include Keith Raniere, Martin Shkreli, and more. Mark was a former federal and state prosecutor. On the co-counsel, you got Tenny Gregaros. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. Tenny specializes in cases ranging from S misconduct, fraud, and public corruption. She's the daughter of the famous attorney Mark Gregaros, who has fought cases for Michael Jackson, Chris Brown, and many other high-profile individuals, and Tenny specifically had previously defended Raniere and Martin Shkreli as well. Then we got Brian Steele, who is acting as the trial strategist. He was allegedly the one who had the idea of having Cassie be cross-examined by a female attorney rather than a male, as he believed she would be more sensitive in her line of questioning and resonate better with the jurors, given the harsh issues that she would have Cassie open up about. But again, we'll be unpacking the entire trial very shortly. If you don't know who Brian Steele is, he was actually Young Thug's lawyer in Thug's own RICO case. He fought and helped Young Thug walk out of court a free man in one of Georgia's longest criminal trials. And during that trial, he was actually briefly jailed for contempt while defending Young Thug. So you can see how hard this man fights. On the appellate counsel, you have Alexandra Shapiro, who also has over 30 years of experience under her belt. Alexandra represented Sam Bankman-Fried in his appeal. She was the former clerk for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was the former deputy chief of appeals for the U.S. Attorney's Office. You also have Xavier R. Donaldson, who is acting as trial counsel. He was a former Bronx prosecutor, also has nearly 30 years of experience in criminal defense, and he actually shared an alma mater with Diddy, both of them graduating Howard University. You also have Anna Estavio, which was the woman cross-examining Cassie. She's acting as the white-collar defense and appeals, and she was a former federal defender in California. As the junior associate, you got Jason Driscoll, and acting as an unofficial advisor, you have Mark Gregaros, who again is the father of Tenny Gregaros and has worked on cases from everyone ranging from Michael Jackson to Chris Brown to Scott Peterson. He's not officially on the team, but he has appeared in court, and prosecutors have been raising concerns over his public comments. Now, with this massive team of highly skilled attorneys, it's safe to say that Diddy's in good hands. But given what's at stake here, this trial will be anything but a walk in the park. Now, as Diddy heads to trial and faces potential consequences, he is looking at a minimum sentence of 15 years in federal prison and a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. To convict Diddy of racketeering, the prosecutors must show that 1. There was indeed a criminal group, like a team committing crimes together. 2. Diddy was a boss or leader within that group. And 3. There was at least 2 serious crimes that were committed as part of that group's activity, like S-trafficking or kidnapping, and that Diddy was involved in them. If they can prove all 3, he can be found guilty of racketeering. To prove the S-trafficking charge, they must prove that Diddy had a use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel participation in commercial S acts or interstate transportation of victims for these purposes. The S-trafficking charge carries the lightest sentence, so at a bare minimum, for prosecutors to convict Diddy, they must prove that 1. Diddy knowingly arranged for someone to engage in commercial S. Even just one incident of it is enough. Number 2, force, fraud, or coercion was used. As an example, that would be threats, manipulation, blackmail, or physical violence. And 3, there's got to be a form of interstate activity, aka the victim was flown, driven, or moved across state lines for that purpose. For the most serious charge, the RICO charge, the prosecutors must prove that 1. There was an ongoing criminal enterprise, aka a group of people with roles and patterns, not just random actions. Number 2, Diddy helped run it or benefit from it. He planned, funded, or directed illegal acts. And number 3, they got to attach at least 2 connected crimes to this organization, which are called predicate acts, such as S-trafficking and drug distribution or obstruction. The key evidence types include victim testimony, credibly describing abuse and coercion, texts, emails, or videos that show threats, payments, or plans, records of flights, hotel stays, and surveillance, and witnesses confirming patterns of abuse or enterprise behavior. At the bottom line, if prosecutors can convince the jury that just one woman was trafficked with force, fraud, or coercion, and Diddy knowingly arranged it, he can be convicted, even without proving the larger quote-unquote enterprise. But on the other end, let's clearly break down what Diddy's defense team needs to show or suggest to the jury in order for him to be found not guilty. So there's one of 6 key things that the defense must do. Number 1 is create reasonable doubt. The jury doesn't need to be convinced that Diddy is innocent. They just need to be unsure that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. An example of this would be if a witness says Diddy threatened them in 2015, the defense might show text messages from that time suggesting the relationship was friendly to cast doubt on their claim. Number 2 is they need to discredit key witnesses, aka show that witnesses are lying, exaggerating, or have ulterior motives like money or revenge. For example, the defense might look at Cassie's civil lawsuit and say in 2023, she settled that with Diddy for millions of dollars, and she's financially motivated to lie or exaggerate her recap of her time with Diddy. Number 3 is they have to argue consent versus coercion. Basically, Diddy's defense has to prove or suggest that the alleged victims willingly participated in these S acts and events. An example of this would be showing messages, photos, or travel records where the women appear happy, planning trips, or even thanking Diddy, undermining the claims of coercion or abuse. Number 4, and this is specifically to defend Diddy against the RICO charge, the defense must deny that there was a criminal enterprise. They have to convince the jury that there was no organized crime ring, just a celebrity entourage or lifestyle. An example of this could be that showing employees were hired for legitimate roles like security, PR, management, etc., and were not involved in or aware of illegal activities. Number 5 is they have to explain away physical evidence. They must suggest that video, audio, hotel surveillance, or texts are taken out of context or misinterpreted. An example of this could be if footage was shown of a woman crying, they might say it was a personal disagreement, not abuse or trafficking. And finally, number 6, the defense must highlight inconsistencies or delays. They have to point out that some accusers waited years to speak up, or gave conflicting stories in their testimonies. An example of this could be a witness saying an abuse happened in a certain hotel in 2017, but travel logs might show that Diddy wasn't there at this time. These are just examples I've created to basically explain what the defense needs to prove. The bottom line before we review this trial is that the defense doesn't have to prove Diddy's innocence. They just need to make the jury doubt whether the prosecution's version of events is completely true, especially around the force, coercion, intent, and the idea of an organized crime network. If they can poke holes in the story of the prosecutors and the witnesses, yes, the jury might not think Diddy's a good guy, but they might not have enough proof or enough conviction that he actually committed the specific crimes that he's being tried against. And with that being said, let's peel back the curtain behind this trial and unfold the horrifying allegations, testimonies, and stories of Diddy throughout the last 20 years. Now, before we kick this off, as you guys know, Cassie Ventura, Diddy's on-again, off-again former ex-girlfriend, was the key witness within this case, and we will mainly be focusing on her testimony, recapping her time with Diddy for the last decade and a half. I just want to preface this by saying Cassie Ventura is walking into that courtroom weeks away from delivering her third child. She is incredibly pregnant right now. The amount of both mental and physical strength that it must take to endure sitting on that stand in this physical state that she's currently in and recapping the horrific events of her time with Diddy is absolutely astonishing and is really, in my opinion, a testament to the breakthroughs that she made in fighting the trauma that she endured throughout her time with Diddy, and is a glowing example for all victims that it's not too late to open up about your pain, your suffering, your past, and get closure and heal from these horrific wounds. I'm not sure if inspiring is the right word to describe Cassie's strength as she goes up to give these day-long testimonies, but given all that she's been through, the state she's in now, being weeks away from delivering a child, and still being able to unpack these horrific stories, takes an immeasurable, incomprehensible amount of strength. So I personally pray that she gets the closure that she very rightfully deserves. So, day one of the trial, May 12th, 2024. The trial kicks off with Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson introducing Diddy to the jury and digging deeper into the crimes he's accused of. She starts off saying, "This is Sean Combs. To the public, he was a cultural icon, a businessman, larger than life. But there was another side to him. You will hear about 20 years of the defendant's crimes. He had a team to help him. Kidnapping, arson, drugs, S-crimes. Let's start with night one. He was on the hunt for his girlfriend, Cassie. He forced her to have S with male S workers while he watched and recorded it. He found out Cassie was seeing another man. Furious, he set out to find Cassie and another man. He woke up an employee to drive to the house, but no one was there. The defendant didn't give up. He kept looking for Cassie. When he found her, he hit her brutally, kicking her in the back and flinging her around like a rag doll. But it wasn't enough. He told Cassie he could release video footage of her having S with male S workers. He broke into a man's house and he beat and blackmailed his girlfriend. These are not his only crimes. Cassie is not the only woman he hit and sexually exploited. 20 years of crimes. He had a business, Bad Boy Records, that made him right. He relied on his bodyguards, chief of staff, who ran all aspects of his life. The group promoted his power. His bodyguards kidnapped an employee and set a car on fire, dangled a person. They delivered drugs whenever he said, including to women he forced to have S with an escort. He transported them across state lines and even out of the country. Let me be very clear. This case is not about a celebrity's private S preferences. This was criminal. He coerced and even used violence. A long of this trial will focus on two women, Cassie and Jane Doe. We will show that the defendant used lies, drugs, threats, and violence to force them to have S with him in front of male S workers. He called them freak-offs, wild king nights, or hotel nights. His staff organized flights, cars, and hotels. At his direction, his staff set up the room with lubricant and lighting. Staff came in with cash to pay the S workers and drugs. He made them take MDMA or Molly and ecstasy. It made them sick, but also aroused. He directed every step. He expected the women to appear to enjoy themselves. He pleasured himself and recorded the events. Cassie was 19 with a hit song. Cassie tried to work on her music, but the defendant made her turn down many opportunities. She recorded, but he had the final say over the music she released. There was never another album. He hit Cassie in the head and dragged her by the hair. He stomped on her face in an SUV, then made her stay in a hotel for a week to hide her injuries. He set up freak-offs as often as once a week. The defendant made her consume urination. As you will see in this trial, he abused her in the hallway of a hotel to drag her back into the freak-off. Initially, she wanted to make him happy, but then she didn't want to. But the defendant made her. The consequences were severe. He hit her when he thought she took too long in the bathroom. Defying him would end in violence. She fled, but he found her with the help of his inner circle. Cassie's career was in his hands. He told her he could destroy her career by releasing videos. When he said to have a freak-off, she knew she had no choice. She called the S-worker and put on the performances that he wanted. Her safety depended on keeping him happy. The relationship was complicated. Both of them were unfaithful, but only one of them had the power. He made Cassie do his bidding in those dark hotel rooms. Cassie was not the only one. This was a pattern. Let me tell you about Jane Doe. She was a single mom that started spending time with Diddy in 2020. She fell in love with him. He was seeing another woman. One night, he told Jane about freak-offs, and then made it happen immediately. He took her to a hotel where an S-worker was on the way. He directed her step by step. Jane thought it was a one-time wild night. She was wrong. He continued, offering a real relationship. Jane wanted the S-worker to wear condoms, but the defendant did not let them. Jane tried to make it through these nights without drugs. The first time, she broke down and took ecstasy to finish. Another time, she vomited, but he said, "Go do it again." Jane found two men and invited them to join the F-offs so she could choose the man she'd be intimate with. The defendant discouraged her from working. He had the power to coerce her back into the hotel rooms. He threatened her with the videos. Not even a year ago, he went to her house. She was angry. She hit him. He became enraged. She tried to hide. She locked herself in the bedroom. He kicked it open. Then the bathroom, the closet, and then the guest bedroom. He kicked her to the ground. He did not let Jane be. He said, "You're not going to F up my night." He said, "Call up an S-worker and perform." Jane followed his instructions. His violence got him what he wanted. Cassie will tell you about the time the defendant forces himself on her. Mia, an employee, will tell you about how the defendant forces himself on her, hand in her dress. Amidst all this violence, he and his inner circle work to cover up the crimes. The video at the LA hotel, you will hear just how far this went. The defendant offered a hotel security guard a wad of cash, a brown paper bag with 100,000 in $100 bills. The inner circle kept Cassie in hiding for days. For all of this, he is charged with multiple federal crimes, racketeering, conspiracy. Cassie and Jane will tell you the most painful experiences of their lives. You'll hear from some of the defendant's employees, including his personal assistant Mia, who he assaulted. She is grappling with it. You will hear from the employee he forced into an SUV with a firearm and from a chef. They worked punishing hours, at times without sleep. They bought drugs for him. They were expected to keep quiet. Some of these victims have already received settlements. You will also hear from some of the S-workers that the defendant directed them and filmed it. An S-worker saw the defendant assault Cassie and drag her during an F-off. You'll see records from hotels and the damage and car services. You will see text messages in which the defendant tells staff to bring cash for S-workers, and by Jane saying she did not want to do F-offs. You will see videos. In them, you can hear the defendant provide direction to Cassie and Jane while on drugs. You will see a video of the defendant brutally hitting Cassie during an F-off in an LA hotel. You will see photos of the damage, including to 4 doors in James' home not even a year ago. You'll see what he had in his home: firearms, med bag of drugs, lube. You will see the agreement with the hotel guard, barring him from speaking after he paid $100,000 for the video. You'll hear him manipulate Jane into saying she wanted it. His threats not to pay for her home. Text to his staff about it. "I ask you to do 3 things. Pay attention to the evidence, follow the judge's instructions on the law, use your common sense, and you will reach the verdict that Sean Combs is guilty." And now it's time for the defense to speak, in which case Tenny Gugaros comes up to the stand. And she says, "This case is about love and jealousy and money. They are trying to turn it into a racketeering case. It will not work. You are the jury. You will evaluate the witnesses, and finally the story can come out. This case isn't about what you heard on the news. Sean Combs is fascinating. He grew up in Harlem and built lawful businesses. He worked for it. He created a culture and produced music that changed a generation. Witnesses will share with you that he is a fascinating person and people are drawn to him. If you wanted to climb in music, apparel, or beverages, you wanted to be around Diddy. He gave people opportunities to work at his companies. He had a vision that few had. The witnesses mostly loved him. The text messages will show you that. He is 55 years old. He is going to be Sean Combs. I am Tenny Gregaros. I am honored to represent him. The only people in this courtroom who will tell you about racketeering are the prosecutors. There was no conspiracy. This case is about Diddy's private S-life. The government has no business in that. These hardworking individuals were educated from Harvard to Howard University. He has a temper and got violent. He is not proud of that. We own it. He sometimes gets so jealous or angry, he is out of control. You will hear that he lied to his girlfriends. You may think he is a jerk or mean, but he's not tried for that. He's tried for running a racketeering enterprise. This is domestic violence. Domestic violence is not S-trafficking. Had he been charged with domestic violence, we would not be sitting through an 8-week trial. He is not guilty of these crimes. As the trial goes on, we are taking accountability. We will not shy away. AKA Sean Combs Diddy, according to Gregaros, is guilty of domestic violence, but this case is not about domestic violence. It's about S-trafficking and racketeering. While his team defends him, they will not shy away about the truth that he was a violent man. Sean Combs had a bit of a different S-life. The alleged victims were all getting something from him. They are adults. They too must take on responsibility for their lives as he does for his. A free choice has pros and cons. You will evaluate these women. They made free choices every day for years. Ask yourself, what are all the ways this individual had the ability to make these choices? Ask, what is this person getting? Something they want, it may differ. Jealousy drove choices of the victims. Diddy never married them, but he is a many-woman man. He is always in multiple relationships. He was not always honest. It drove a primal jealousy. Sean Combs is extremely jealous. You might think it's hypocritical. They remained in multi-year relationships with him. These women were in love with him. Infidelity and jealousy drove the violence. Alcohol and drugs drove things. But he is not a racketeer. This case is about his relationships with Cassie and Jane. You will hear about swinger parties. They will testify about things that should never be heard in a federal courtroom that he liked to watch. You may not like that, but you are not here to judge him for his S preferences. A wealthy rapper paid for these women's homes and vacations. He is not charged with being a flawed individual. These women fought to be in a relationship with him. Cassie, I expect you will hear from her this week about her 11-year relationship. Combs was with Kim Porter, the mother of 4 of his children. He continued with her until her death from pneumonia in 2018. And his fights with Cassie were about cheating. It was a toxic relationship. They loved each other. Cassie will tell you about the jealousy of Kim Porter, then Gina. The day of the hotel hallway, jealousy was on display. Violence by the elevator bank 10 years ago. You will see it later today. What Combs did is indefensible. The video is not evidence of S-trafficking. Cassie walked out of the hotel room with 2 bags. Combs comes down wearing only a towel. He hits her and drags her by her hoodie. He comes back around to get a phone. What causes a fight about a phone? Phones keep the secrets of infidelity. As soon as he gets the phone, he sits down. He's visibly disgusted. Cassie calls security. You will hear from this security guard later today. The guard tells him to leave the public area. You will see Cassie telling him to get back to the hotel room. They stayed together 2 more years after this incident. Even into 2018, they are fighting to stay together. She saw a photo of Diddy with Gina. He started with Gina in 2014. Cassie had a choice every single day to stay with Diddy. That was her better choice, until she broke up with him. She was not coerced. When she left, there were no repercussions. She ran into the arms of a physical trainer that Diddy had hired to train her. The only F-offs you will see at this trial were on her phone, not his. In November of 2018, Kim Porter passes away from pneumonia. Cassie did everything to be there for Diddy. She flew to Georgia. Amidst a breakup, she flew to be with him. Diddy said, "Kim was my soulmate." The end of the relationship between Diddy and Cassie was triggered by that. Cassie realized all the things she would not be. She wanted to be Diddy's wife, the love of his life. She spent 11 years trying to get that. Cassie married the trainer and is pregnant with her 3rd child. Evaluate Combs' intent at the time. For those 11 years, the messages will show she was a willing participant in their S life. Cassie's testimony this week cannot change that. In 2020 with Jane, Combs was more upfront. He told her he was dating other women. She was still jealous. Jane wanted it public. He proposed a consensual threesome. They went to a private hotel. I expect her to say she enjoyed it. Jane was desperate to be with him, to give him things that others couldn't. She tried to make it more than just about S. I'm not sure how she will put it, but it always comes back to parties in the hotel rooms. This was their time together. Jane did it for the cuddle. She wanted to make him happy. She was unable to resist him emotionally. There was a phone call in November 2023. Even after it, she flew out to see him many more times. It was toxic, but she was willing. Being a willing participant in your S life is not S trafficking. If she'd walked away, she would have lost him. You will see her jealousy. She would see him on social media with other women and she would send messages of regret. It's not coerced. She was driven to try to be in the first place. This was her way to try to get there. This was not a crime. There was a night a year ago when Jane hit Combs. It was born out of jealousy. He hit her back. She was overcome by jealousy. She slammed his head. She slammed his head onto her kitchen counter. Months later, she flew to see him and invited an S worker, and she will call it one of her best nights, a wild king night, whatever you want to call it. This will be hard to watch. They are, in one word, intimate. The government told you about someone named Mia. Why are they making these allegations now? You will conclude that everyone has a motive. With Mia, she never said it before, nor when she first started cooperating with the government. If this was so hostile, why did they not call the police? They are vindictive. Their motive is simple: money. Cassie filed a public lawsuit in November 2023. She was living in her parents' modest home in Connecticut. She went to a civil lawyer. The civil lawyer is here today. They went to a civil lawyer to make a money grab. Cassie demanded $30 million. Another asked for $22 million. How many millions of reasons do these witnesses have to lie? The evidence will not make out the charges. On bribery, this is about the Intercontinental Hotel. He paid a security guard to make the footage go away. This was solely to prevent bad publicity for Combs and for Cassie. There was no law enforcement investigation. The kidnapping related to an employee. She worked for him for 10 years. She asked to work for him again. Moving drugs? It was for personal use. They worked hard. They were there to do something great and novel. It was a free choice. There was no conspiracy. He was paying different men for their time and experience. P actors getting paid. Hulkamania, Cowboys for Angels. You can pay money for time and an experience. That is what Sean Combs was doing. To the jurors, you are not here to impose your morality on this man. If you listen, you will find him not guilty of these crimes. Thank you. Then they break for lunch, and after lunch, the government calls in their first witness. It is an LAPD officer by the name of Israel Flores. Flores takes the stand and says, "I'm a reservist for the Army. I was a guard with Securitas in 2016 in the Intercontinental Hotel near Central City. What happened on March 5th, 2016? The government asks. Flores says, "I was told of the 6th floor. There, I recognized Diddy. He is there wearing a gray sweater. I was the assistant director of security. At 11 a.m., I got a report of a woman in distress on the 6th floor. I closed the security base and checked the cameras. There was an African-American man pacing back and forth. I didn't see a female. I rushed there. I saw Mr. Combs in a towel and some colored socks. He's a rapper, producer, and Cassie is on the floor. I told them they were arguing and they'd have to take it back to the room, and that the broken vase would be charged to the room. Cassie said she wanted her phone and her bag. Cassie said she wanted to leave. Mr. Combs said, "You're not leaving. I saw inside the room a black male wearing dark clothing." What did Diddy do after Cassie left? He called for me. He was holding a stack of money, not to tell anyone. What did you say? I said, "I don't want your money. The damage is going to be charged to your room." Where did Cassie go? After I spoke with her, she left. A car pulled up. She left in a black SUV. Was there a driver? 7 feet. He said, "She wants to leave." I said, "I'm talking to her, not you." The driver left. We went up to Combs' room to remind him of hotel rooms. He opens the door and grabs the phone and says, "Are you recording me?" I pinned him to the wall. I took photos of the broken vase to tell them to come clean it up. I went to write the incident report. I reminded Diddy that the checkout time was approaching. I reviewed the security camera footage of the incident, and I recorded 2 videos of it with my iPhone to show my wife at home. I had the next 2 days off of work, and when I came back in, the video was gone. So essentially, this man came in to the 6th floor of the hotel hallway where Cassie and Diddy were arguing. He broke up the fight, wrote an incident report, reviewed the security camera footage in which Diddy abused Cassie, recorded it with his iPhone, and when he came back into work 2 days later, the security camera footage was gone. Again, remember, Diddy had offered him money to stay quiet. And now we get to the cross-examination of the security. So for now, this was the prosecutor asking Israel to recap these events. Now it's Diddy's team's turn to ask him questions. And so Brian Steele steps in and says, "You said your report was the 5 W's, right?" Flores says, "Yes." I'm assuming that means who, what, where, and why. Brian Steele continues saying, "You mentioned that when you got off the elevator, you described Diddy as having a devilish expression on his face." Flores says, "That's my opinion." Brian Steele says, "When you got off the elevator, what's in your hand?" "My radio." "Diddy did not attack you, did he?" "No, he did not." "And was there any law enforcement involvement?" "No, there wasn't." "You recorded for your wife and kept it, right?" Flores says, "I did." "But never was law enforcement called?" "They were not." "You told the jury that Diddy said to Cassie, 'You're not leaving,' but your report did not say that, right?" Flores said, "At that point, I didn't believe that that was a significant fact for the incident report. I'm not going to put down the whole back and forth." Brian Steele says, "So it wasn't important 9 years ago, but it's important now?" Flores says, "I did not put it in the report at the time." Steele says, "You said you were offered a bribe, but didn't you tell him he had to pay for the vase?" "Yes." "The gentleman you say that you saw in the room, you described to the jury things that are not in your report." Basically because on the stand, Flores says he saw in Diddy's hotel room a black male in dark clothing, but he didn't actually put that in the incident report. And Flores says, "That's because that male did not engage. I asked him his name, he wasn't talking to anyone." He's then asked if he knew who the 7-foot driver was. Flores said, "I don't know him, but Cassie knew him." So Brian Steele says, and again, Brian Steele is the one defending Diddy, "You didn't put in your report that you offered to call law enforcement, but she refused. Why not?" Flores said, "Cassie said no, so there was no reason to include that." Steele said, "You said you put Mr. Combs against the wall. That's aggressive, isn't it?" Flores said, "It could be, but I only put my forearm against his chest." Brian Steele says, "But you didn't put that in your report." Flores says, "You're asking me to have put more detail in my report." So essentially here, again, the issue at hand is the hotel security footage, which is available online. Of course, I'm not going to play that in this video. We see Diddy in a towel abusing Cassie, and the man on the stand on this day one of the trial, Israel Flores, was the security guard who broke up the fight. Brian Steele here, while cross-examining Flores, is trying to paint the picture that, again, during this issue of abuse, Cassie was not forced to stay. She interacted with the driver, she refused to have law enforcement called, and Brian Steele is questioning Flores to make sure he emphasizes that. Then, of course, there's the issue of bribery, right? Because Flores reports that Combs had offered Flores money, which could be implied that it was money used to make Flores be quiet about what he saw. But remember, there was also a broken vase. So Diddy's team attempts to frame it like the cash Diddy was offering the security guard was not a bribe for him to be quiet, but instead it was money to pay for the broken vase. So Brian Steele says, "Diddy, it was clear to you that he wanted to pay for the damage, right?" And the U.S. attorney, aka the prosecutor, calls for an objection and says it's calls for speculation. The judge says, "Ask that question in a different way." So Brian Steele says, "It can be embarrassing for a guest," and then the attorney again interrupts him saying, "Objection." The judge says, "Sustained." Brian Steele says, "Nothing further." And the U.S. attorney then comes in to ask the security guard, "Did you typically include every single detail in a report?" Flores says, "No." "Did Diddy seem drunk or high?" Flores says, "No." "When he offered you money, what did he say?" Flores says that he didn't want anyone to know about it, pretty much. "Which way was Diddy dragging Cassie?" Flores says, "Back towards the room." Nothing further. Then the next witness is called, who is an S worker and remains anonymous. So the U.S. attorney says, "What did Cassie pay you for?" The witness says, "To have S with her. Sean Combs was there too. My boss called me and said he couldn't find any of our black dancers, so could I go to a bachelorette party in the Gramercy Park Hotel in downtown Manhattan. What did you expect to do? A little stripper dance. She was in the hotel room in a red wig, stockings, and sunglasses. She gave me a few $100s. The room had red couches, Astroglide, a lubricant. There was a male on the right side of the room. The man had on a white robe and a bandana over his face, below his eyes, and baseball cap. From his voice, I recognized him as Diddy." So essentially, this witness is an S worker who Cassie called. She was wearing a wig. Diddy had on a white robe, a bandana over his face, and a hat. He expected to just be doing a little dance. He ends up having S with Cassie, and Diddy, of course, is covering his face with this bandana. But he recognizes Diddy's voice as being Diddy. And the U.S. attorney asks, what did Diddy say? The dancer says that he was into importing and exporting. He was having problems with my boss. After the S was done, Cassie gave him a couple of $1,000s more. The male dancer continues, Diddy said to give them my phone number. I did. Cassie called me and asked for a photo. Then what? She called me to go back. I did, for a few hours. And then a few times after that. Was Diddy always present? Yes, he was. At any other locations? Yes. Baby oil was used every time. Diddy said we didn't have enough baby oil on. He'd say, y'all slow down, separate from each other. One time he tried to have us roleplay, like we had just met at an airport. We weren't good, so we skipped that. They weren't good actors. What directions did Mr. Combs give you? He'd tell me to step off and back off. How many times, if any, were you told to urinate? Of course, on Miss Ventura. The dancer says, they told me not to do it all at once. Then the defense comes in and says, objection. What happened afterwards? They'd leave me waiting for hours. The whole thing might go on for 10 hours. On one occasion, they were headed to the Essex Hotel. They said to go in 30 minutes. It was the first time Diddy opened the doors as himself, dressed in a suit with no masks. Then the attorney asked, how did things change? He didn't feel, and then there's another objection. Who, if anyone, had recorded the interaction? The dancer says Diddy did, with a cell phone and a camcorder. He took a photo of my driver's license for insurance. I understood that as him threatening me. One time I went and Cassie was slumped over, and Diddy said, it's not going to happen this time. Did Diddy offer you drugs? Molly, yes, and I don't usually do them. How did it make you feel? Sick and euphoric. Like an idiot, I was handing out $100 bills. Who else was there? A guy who told me he was an actual S worker. He was having S with Cassie at her apartment. The guy was like looking at Diddy, and Diddy said, don't you be effing looking at me. The U.S. attorney asked him, did it ever seem like you were not the first person there at the F-off? He said, yes. Then they said, after the $100 bills incident, did you see Cassie and Diddy again? The male dancer said, I couldn't do it anymore. What did you get paid when you couldn't perform? Nothing, but I never asked for money. I was happy to get involved with people with such notoriety. But after I saw Diddy hit Cassie, I couldn't do it anymore. What was Diddy saying as he hit Cassie? He said, B, when I tell you to come over, you come over. I didn't know what to do. Did you intervene? No. I knew there were chances there were bodyguards. Then Diddy said, are y'all ready to continue? Then he's asked, did you see Cassie and Diddy again? And he said, I thought I had developed some sort of friendship with Cassie. I may have been speculating. I went there. I heard him slapping her. He walked out in a towel. She ran to me. I asked, why are you staying with this guy? She said she was okay. And then we get to find out that this male dancer was named Daniel Phillip. Diddy's attorney comes in to ask, Cassie was wearing a wig? The dancer says yes. She handed you money? Yes, she handed me $4,000. Before any oil rubbing? Correct. She had on heels and dark glasses. Where'd the money come from? Her hand. You were wearing a New York City Police Department uniform, right? He said, I bought an NYPD t-shirt. You took the oil off in front of Cassie? The oil? No, I took my clothes off. She said, it's my birthday. It appears she is enjoying herself, right? Yes. She asked you for a photo? He says, I don't know if Diddy asked for it. The judge says, ignore that. We'll pick up from here tomorrow. And then I guess this male dancer makes a final statement, which was kind of interesting. He says, they used to call me cowboy when I did exotic dances. Then Diddy in a bandana rode me from the shadows. I wanted what he had, even as I had it, as an imposter, as entertainment. When they gave me MDMA, I gave away their money. Every bum in Times Square having more than me. Now this Mr. X asks about the website, that old man over there, finally out from behind the mask. Kind of sounds like a strange poem, but it's interesting that when this dancer was given money for his services and MDMA, he ended up handing out the money to bums in Times Square because he was feeling so euphoric. And now we get in to day 2. So the day starts out with the judge, the prosecutors, and the defense lawyers debating whether explicit video evidence of Cassie and Diddy should be shown in the court or kept private to basically protect the jurors and to protect public transparency while still balancing the press's right to report on the trial. Diddy's attorney, Tenny Gregaros, says Diddy expected Cassie was cheating on him. She didn't answer her phone. She got into a bar fight and tried to unalive someone. So it's relevant, this evidence, to his suspicions and her substance abuse outside of their relationship. She was taking drugs while close with her family in another state. So the judge says that this can be asked about, this piece of evidence. So now the U.S. attorney comes in saying, in the defense's opening, they said Cassie made her own choices. They asked who really had control in this relationship, clearly begging the answer that it was Cassie. The threat to release the S-tape, they said only she had it. So now the male dancer is back on the stand, and after he was handing out $100 bills in Times Square, he returns to the hotel. And Combs' defendant asks, while you and Cassie were getting intimate for hours, Cassie took the lead? The dancer says no. So he says, you took the lead? We were equally doing our thing. There wasn't a leader. You decided together? Yes. Fair to say she was in complete control of everything she was doing? The dancer says, I can't say that. Okay, that assault at her apartment. You claim that Diddy told her to come over. She said she had her personal information on the computer, so wait a minute. And he threw a bottle at her? The dancer says, yes. He comes out and says, are you ready? The dancer says, no. Diddy said, are you guys ready? Then Combs' defendant says, isn't it true that Diddy told you, yo man, I'm going to have to deal with this. You need to get the F out. Then the dancer says, that's not correct. In 2023, didn't you tell prosecutors that he said, yo man, and then the U.S. attorney calls in for objection? The dancer says, I don't remember saying that. What am I reading here? Get the F out. Then he's asked, did you date a model named Melia? The dancer says, Malia, and I didn't say I dated her. We were friends. You were with her and saw Cassie with someone, not Diddy. Yes. You told Melia you saw Cassie socially? The dancer says, yes. You thought Cassie wanted to see you one-on-one. Nothing to do with Diddy, right? The dancer says, I don't see what you mean. In front of the Dream Hotel, that's what you thought. He said, no. You only saw her inebriated one time. The dancer says, I saw her passed out on the couch. Mr. Combs told me, I don't think it's going to happen today. The time with the other male, you rotated with Cassie? He says, not correct. I watched her with the other man. You said that Diddy was directing, but do you recall meeting the prosecutors on March 28th, 2025 and telling them that you don't recall Diddy giving directions about positions? The dancer says, yes. So he didn't direct. Incorrect. You thought you were in a relationship with Cassie, didn't you? The dancer says, no. You wanted to get alone with her, to date her. The dancer says, if she'd let me, I would have. Would you get jealous of Diddy? The dancer says, no. Did you not tell them that Diddy would tell you it's my turn? The dancer says, I don't recall that. He's then asked to explain why he had said that Diddy was directing them. And the dancer said, he asked about positions, but Diddy did tell us what to do. Use baby oil. Did Cassie call you after the incident at the hotel? Yes. Do you know who she was with? No. Did she answer your text messages? Never, almost. You said you wanted to hug her. Why? The dancer said, I could tell she was afraid. What did you do? The dancer said, I could not engage. I was messed up. What did Diddy say to you? He said, it's time for you to go. Then Diddy's defendant comes in and says, do you see your text? Don't give a F if I'm a little tipsy. I love y'all guys. The dancer says, yes. And that was after the beating? That's when you sent that? The dancer said, yeah. Nothing further. Then the U.S. attorney said, why did you write that? The dancer said, I wanted them to see I had no problem with what he had done. It kept it going. Then Diddy's attorney, the cross-examiner, Ana Maria Estavio, said, we'd like Cassie's husband to not be allowed in the courtroom during her testimony. We may need to call him as a witness later, depending on the direct. Then his other attorney, Tenny Gregarios, comes in and says, give me 15 seconds. If he wants to come in the courtroom today, but we ask that he be excluded when the testimony gets into post-2018. Because again, that's when Cassie started having a relationship with him. And at the same time, 2018 was when some of the most dark things happened between Diddy and Cassie. And we'll touch on that shortly throughout Cassie's testimony, which is about to start right now. So on this day, it's just the U.S. attorney who is prosecuting Diddy that is questioning Cassie. So they start off asking her, how old are you? She says 38. What is your work? Musician and entertainer. How long were you with Diddy? 10 years. Did you get in arguments? Yes, it would result in violence, dragging. How frequently was he violent? Too frequently. I would get black eyes and bruises. Then they play the footage of Diddy abusing in the Intercontinental Hotel, and Cassie says This was after a freak-off. What does that entail? Cassie says the freak-off entails hiring an S-worker, setting it up, and they ask, how did you feel when he first asked for it? Cassie says, I was confused, nervous. I wanted to make him happy. Did you agree to one when he first proposed one? Cassie says, yes. Then there were more. It wasn't something I wanted to do, at least not that frequently. I didn't know what saying no could turn into. The U.S. attorney asks, what do you mean by that? Cassie says, making him angry. What were you afraid would happen if you said no? Cassie said, through time, he had blackmail materials. What did you give the government? Cassie says, laptops. Then they open up some evidence from Cassie's laptop, and the U.S. attorney said, what is this photo? Cassie said, me in 2004 with Carrie Morgan. The U.S. attorney asks, when did you sign to Bad Boy Records? She says, 2006. It was a 10-album deal. Did you release any albums after late 2006? Cassie says, no. Then they ask, who's in this photo? Kim Porter. She was Diddy's ex from before me and the mother of his children. Where did you celebrate your birthday in this photo? In Las Vegas. Carrie Morgan was there too. Carrie Morgan, on a side note, is one of Cassie's old friends, who is no longer friends with him due to an assault she faced from Diddy. In this photo, she describes they're in Las Vegas and says, we're out on his patio on my 21st birthday, the VMAs. What happened then? Diddy kissed me in the bathroom. I ran back to my hotel. I told Carrie. With my music career, I was trying to come up with a concept. Diddy called all the shots. Then they ask, what is the age difference between you and Diddy? Cassie says, 17 years. How did you feel when Diddy invited you to hotels? Nervous, excitement. We're going to talk about music. That's what I thought. He introduced me to Oral S. I didn't understand it. Did you visit Sean in Miami? Yes. I was with Carrie Morgan and Dallas Austin. What did you and Diddy do together? S. Intercourse. He gave me MDMA on a boat. Had you once before taken MDMA unintentionally? Cassie says yes. How? It was in Gatorade. When you took it intentionally with Sean, how did it make you feel? She says, like rolling. At the time, I thought we were spending a lot of time together. I thought we were monogamous. Was it made public? No. I was his artist. Also, his family, his children, essentially they couldn't find out. Who was Diddy linked to publicly at the time? Cassie says, Kim Porter. How did Diddy treat you at this time? Cassie said, we had fun. What was his lifestyle like? He had all these assistants. He could get things done. He traveled quite a bit. How did Diddy's moods vary? Day to day. When it swung, could you describe it? Anger, zoning out. How did it impact you? Greatly. The next thing I knew, I was getting hit in the face. There was a psychological abuse. He'd tell me to wash my mouth, change my face. How would he keep tabs on you? We didn't live far apart. He'd send security to come find me, or a trusted assistant. Our relationship wasn't exclusive. I'd see other men, Sean would see other women. He would say, I'm Puff Daddy, and I was insanely jealous. Then they asked, did you move to LA with him? Cassie says yes. He wanted to be close to his kids who were there. Sean lived close by, and he would use a golf cart to get back and forth. He paid my rent, except when I had the house in Studio City. And they asked, why'd you pay then? Cassie said, I could afford it then, and I wanted to have some control. It was accepted. By whom? By Diddy. So essentially, Cassie had two houses, one of them that was paid for by Diddy and that he lived very close to. He would take a golf cart to her house, and she had another house that she paid for by herself to maintain some control of her life. Then she's asked, how many songs did you write while working with Diddy? Cassie said hundreds. Most were never released. Some got leaked on the internet, some on mixtapes. How many albums on your deal were not released? Cassie says 9. Did you get paid for them? No. The freak-offs became a job. There was no time to do anything else but do them and then try to recover. How much time in your RICO would freak-offs take? Cassie says the longest was 4 days, significant periods of time. So they would have 4-day freak-offs. Then they take a break and they come back, and Cassie's asked, who was your manager at Bad Boy Records? She says James Cruz. What did he tell you? That he was managing me with one hand tied behind his back. He had to check everything with Diddy. How did you make money if your records weren't being released? Cassie said, I did hosting parties when Diddy approved them. What comments did Diddy make about your physical appearance? Cassie said that I look too Mexican with my hair like that. How did he like your hair? It varied. I shaved my head in 2009. And there's actually a story, I believe, from Young Jock, who was at a club with Diddy and Cassie in 2009. And he said Diddy saw a woman with half her head shaved, and that's when he decided Cassie would have the same haircut. It wasn't her idea. Then she's asked, how did he like your body? Cassie said, he told me to work out, prepare for the freak-offs. How did you feel about his comments? Cassie said it varied. What else did Diddy pay for? Cars? Did he give you cash? Yes, but he would take things away, depending on how he felt. What else would he take away? Cassie said, my self-confidence. Who would take things away? Cassie said, I assume his staff. Then Diddy's defense comes in to say, objection, because again, that kind of implies that this may have been a criminal enterprise, aka in line with the RICO charge, because his staff were working with him to control people like Cassie while she was coerced into these acts. So the defense comes in to object when she says that. And the judge says the jury will disregard that last answer. Then the attorney asks, who took your laptop and phone? Cassie says, security did. How long would they be gone for? However long I was being punished for. How often were you in contact with Diddy's staff? Cassie says daily. She's then asked if she recalls an incident between Diddy and Suge Knight. And Cassie says, yeah, we were having a freak-off in LA. D-Rock, Diddy's security, came in and said Suge Knight was down at a diner. Diddy drove over there. What was your reaction? Cassie said, I cried. Said, don't do something stupid. Were you ever handed a firearm? Cassie says yes. Then they switched topics. Cassie's asked, how soon into the relationship did Diddy mention voyeurism with you? Cassie says, first 6 months or a year. How old were you? Cassie says, I was only 22. Why did you agree to try a freak-off? Cassie said, good question. I wanted to make him happy. Where was the first freak-off? One of his homes in LA. Then she's shown a picture of the first S-worker that she interacted with, and Cassie says she was aware that he got paid to dance and have intercourse with her. She would take ecstasy and alcohol before things started. She would also disguise her appearance along with Diddy. She said, Diddy said we would disguise ourselves. I wore a masquerade mask. What was considered a session in a freak-off was when the S-worker actually finished. She's then asked, how many sessions with the first S-worker? Cassie says, at least 2. Then she's asked, how did you feel? Again, this was the first freak-off she did. Cassie said, I was high, so I didn't feel much, dirty and confusion, and that he was happy with me. Why did you feel you couldn't say no? Cassie said, I didn't want to make him feel angry or upset after he'd shared this part of himself with me. Because of course, you have to remember, this is a young girl who is just getting into a relationship with Diddy, and he confides in her sharing this dark secret about what he's into, and she didn't want to basically make him upset or angry after he shared that, so she was convinced to take part in the first one. And then she's asked, how often or how frequent did the freak-offs become? Cassie said, weekly for a consistent amount of years. When was your last one? Cassie said 2017, 2018. Then she's asked, how long were you awake during the freak-offs? Cassie said, I never slept. I took drugs. Do you recall all of the freak-offs? That would be impossible. Did you want to stop? Cassie said, yes, I was humiliated. I didn't have those words then. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And as she's saying this, she begins to cry. Then she's asked, did you tell him you didn't want to? Cassie said, yes. I brought it up gently. I didn't want him to just go do it with someone else. Were you able to express your concerns to him? Why would you talk to him gently? Cassie said, I didn't want him to be angry. Then she's shown another picture, an email between her and Diddy, and the U.S. attorney asks her, what did you call Diddy? Cassie says, Pop Pop. They ask why. She says, he asked me what I called my grandfather. I did it, but now I think it was disrespectful. What did you write? Cassie said, I wrote, I really wanted to F. Why did you write that? Cassie said, because I wanted to be with him. Then they go into a role play where the U.S. attorney is reading Diddy's messages and Cassie reads her own. So Diddy asks, you don't want to do anymore? Cassie said, I'm so predictable. The attorney asks, what did you think Diddy meant by you don't want to do anymore? Cassie said, that he knew that I didn't want to do the freak-offs anymore, but then I backpedaled. Why'd you backpedal? To not make Diddy angry. He could be violent. Where'd you get your outfit? Pleasure Chest and elsewhere. We gave names to each other during the freak-offs. Jackie Star, I used Frank Black. The supplies used during the freak-offs were Astroglide baby oil. Security and assistants would bring the baby oil. It was Johnson & Johnson's baby oil. How was it used? Diddy said, you need to be glistening. If we ran out of baby oil, we'd either call the staff or the bell desk and give them a tip. Were the freak-offs lit up? Like, was the room lit up? Cassie said initially it was candle, strong smelling, Glade, any other use of candle wax. Cassie said a few times it was poured on me. On my period, I was still expected to do freak-offs. Did you want to do that? Cassie said no. Did you want to be PE'd on? And then there's an objection from Diddy's defense. They didn't want her to answer that question, but the judge says, overruled. And Cassie says, no, I did not want that. And then the attorney asks, how did it feel? Cassie said, it was disgusting. It was too much. I choked. No one could think that I wanted that. Why were you choking? And Cassie said, too much of it in my mouth. Who else did this to you? Diddy also did this to me. Did you want Diddy to do that to you? Cassie said, I didn't want anyone to do that to me. How often did it happen? Cassie said, often enough. Why didn't you say no? Cassie said, it was obvious that I did not want to be on the ground being PEE'd on by two men. Where did you find the S workers? Initially Craigslist. What was considered a safe S worker? Cassie said, someone who's not a cop and someone who'd not run and tell everyone about their experience with us. The attorney says, why not a cop? Cassie said, I learned that this whole situation was not legal. One of the S workers was named the Punisher. She's then asked, did you consume illegal substances at every freak-off? Cassie says, yes, I needed to disassociate and become emotionless. Who else used these substances at freak-offs? She said, Diddy did. Sometimes the S workers. What substances? Special K, GHB, mushrooms. Then they go on to read more emails between Diddy and Cassie, and it's basically just one email where Cassie says, when should I take the thing? When will you be there? She was referring to, obviously, drugs. Then Diddy in that email said, I took mine. I'm flying. What does he mean? Cassie said he means he's high. Why did you take more substances? Cassie said to not be present with the experience. Why? Because it was something I hated. During the freak-off session, how would you know when to move to the next step? Cassie said, Sean would tell me. What would happen after the S worker finished on you? Cassie said, Sean would want it put on his body in the next room. Did you do that? I did. Where? Usually on his nipples. Did you want to do that? No. How did you feel? Cassie said, I was an object, being heavily objectified by men. Sometimes he would watch by FaceTime. Were some sessions recorded on your devices? Cassie said, yes, because they were there. If you saw them on your device, what would you do? Cassie said, I would delete them. Why? Because they were disgusting. I never wanted anyone to see them. Were Diddy's devices used sometimes? Cassie said, yes. I asked him to delete them. Did he? Cassie says, I don't know. Did you ever leave a freak-off before it was over? Cassie said, yes, at the Century City Intercontinental. I finally had a premiere coming up and I didn't want to mess it up. But did he hit me? At what point did he hit you? Between sessions. What happened next? I got to the elevator. Next thing I knew, I was being thrown to the ground. Who threw you? Diddy. And this is, of course, the same incident that we heard Israel Flores testify, the security who interacted with Diddy and Cassie during this incident. And now they're going to touch on Cassie's perspective of that incident in the Intercontinental Hotel. Essentially, she had ran out during the freak-off and tried to leave, and Diddy attacked her. So they play the video and ask Cassie, what are you doing? Cassie says, I was trying to use the hotel phone. They said, what is Diddy doing? Taking my phone and my bag. And that's it for day 2. We now get into day 3, where Cassie continues to testify. So again, at this point in the trial, it's still the U.S. attorney, the prosecutors against Diddy, who are questioning Cassie. So they start off asking her, yesterday you testified about Diddy going armed to look for Suge Knight. Cassie said Diddy took firearms with him. And Diddy told you to ask the S workers if they were cops? Cassie said I would begin by saying I was not a cop. Diddy told you to do that? Cassie said yes. What happened when you fought back? Cassie said, I did that more earlier in the relationship. It would make him more violent, want me to push harder. How would Sean react if you fought back? Cassie said, with anger. Now they play more footage of that altercation at the Intercontinental Hotel in the hallway, and they ask, who's that approaching? Cassie says, Diddy. What's in his hand? He doesn't appear to have anything in his hand. Now is there anything in his hand? And they skip forward in the video. Cassie says, yeah, that's my phone. How did he get it? Well, he took all my stuff. Where does he end up? Sitting in a chair in front of the window in the hallway. They ask, what are you doing? Cassie says, I'm walking away from him. Now who's in the video? Me and the security. In this one, play at the 5-minute mark. Where did you go from the hotel? Cassie says, to my house. I took an Uber. Then they ask her to read a text message which says, please call. I'm surrounded. And they ask, who sent that? Cassie says, it was from Diddy. He was running around in a towel. I told him to put a robe on. Then they ask, who sent these green messages? Cassie says, I did. I wrote to Diddy, Jules left. As long as you're quiet, You can stay. Peace. Who was Jules? He was an S worker. Then they show a photo of Cassie in big sunglasses, and she says, that's me, a selfie of me with a fat lip. When did you take it? I took it in the Uber with one of my phones. What did you write here? And it was obviously a text with that picture, with that selfie of Cassie with sunglasses, with a text that said, please stay away from me. And then they ask, what did Diddy say? Cassie says, he says, I'm getting arrested. So Diddy was telling her, please come, I'm surrounded. She sends a picture of her with a fat lip, saying, please stay away from me. He says, I'm getting arrested. And the U.S. attorney asks, was he getting arrested? Cassie says, I don't think so. So they say, what did you write back? Cassie said, plugging my phone in and going to bed. Who was at your home when you got there? Carrie Morgan. Again, that was Cassie's friend. She was upset when she saw me. She called the police. Did you speak to the police? Yes, but I didn't say who I was talking about, and they left. Why? Well, I wasn't ready. Did Diddy try to come to your apartment? Yes, he was banging. That was pretty normal from him. But this was a pretty private building. Then they show more text messages where Cassie says, this is all we do. I'm just getting back on track. I'm sure you can call Kim or something. And they ask, what did you mean by this is all we do? Cassie says, freak-offs. Did you try to avoid anything in the freak-offs? Cassie said, I tried to avoid kissing. It seems too intimate. But Diddy told me to do it, to kiss the S-workers. What did Diddy ask you to do on your 29th birthday? Cassie said, a freak-off. He had me pulled out of the Blind Dragon for the freak-off by some security. What about blackmail material? Cassie said, he wanted me to fear. When would Sean mention the freak-off videos? Cassie said, to hurt me. One time I was dating someone else and he threatened to release the freak-off videos. I'd have to answer to my mother. It's horrible and disgusting. No one should do that to anyone. What did Diddy say the impact would be? Cassie said it would be shame. So essentially Diddy was blackmailing her with freak-off videos when she would be with another man. Then they go through more text conversations, this one from July of 2013, and Cassie said, please delete the videos off your phone. 2. Many people have access to your devices. Diddy said, no iCloud, all good, Ambient kicking in. Then they show more text conversations, but they don't say specifically what Cassie said, but she describes it by saying, I've been told there was a explicit video out there about me, so I reached out to Diddy. Then what? We were driving back to New York City from Atlantic City to talk to this DJ Who Kid. Did that happen? At a restaurant. What was the security's role? To intimidate. They were lining the room. Who was there? Uncle Paulie, James Cruz. How would you recover from a freak-off? I'd take opiates. I wanted to feel numb. We'd get massages, IV fluids. The chef would cook us something. How often did you take opiates after freak-offs? Often. I got UTIs. Were they painful? Very. Antibacterials didn't work anymore. How did it feel during freak-offs? It would burn. I would not advise it. Let's read this out loud. And then they read some texts where Cassie says, I have all these friction on my tongue. I have another UTI. The friction was from oral S. And then you said another UTI with a sad face emoji. Cassie said, I was open with him about them. Then Diddy said, so you feel sick? Cassie said, why? Are you sorry? Cassie said, I took the blame for things. Which S worker would go to S clubs with you and Diddy? Cassie said, Jules would. That's the S worker from the fight at the Intercontinental Hotel. Did you want to have S with Jules ever? Cassie says no, and she laughs. But I knew him. So why did you do it? Cassie says, because of Diddy. Who was present when Diddy put his hands on you at freak-offs? Sometimes the S workers were there too. In the same room? Yes, Jules was. And in the suite? Yes. And they were aware? Yes. The S workers would ask if I was okay afterwards. They show more photos and they ask, where were you going? Cassie says, to a music festival in Canada run by Drake. Diddy came to my house and tried to attack me. I was thrown into the bed frame. What's this? It's a photo of my eye afterwards. Who took you to the doctor? Diddy security, D-Rock. Did you send this photo to Diddy? Yes. And I wrote, so you can remember. I wanted him to be sorry about it at least. Then they ask, in this photo, where were you? Cassie says, in the green room in Toronto. I put my hair over my eye. Then we went to the Hamptons. Diddy wanted to have a freak-off in the Hamptons. We got a hotel and an S worker. I took GHB and I went into a G-hole and blacked out. I woke up in the shower. Dave and Diddy, Dave is the S worker, were freaking out. I bugged out. It wasn't pretty. Then what? I spoke to a friend of Diddy's and then we had a freak-off. What's this? My eyebrow. It healed up a bit a week later. I have a permanent scar on my eyebrow. They keep showing more photos. One of them is Cassie at the Canes Festival. And then they say, what happened at the Canes Festival? Cassie says, Diddy accused me of taking substances from his boat. He threw me off, but my passport was still on the boat. And you were on the red carpet that same night? Cassie said, yeah. Did you attend the movie? Yes. How did you get back to New York after that? On a commercial flight. I traded my seat to get away, but he traded to get one next to me. What did he show you? Freak-off videos. He played them for me on one of his laptops. He said he would release them. How did you feel? I felt trapped. When you landed in New York, what did you do? We went to a dinner. Then he wanted to have a freak-off, so we had a freak-off. Why did you do it? To make him not threaten me. Let's read these text messages from June of 2013. Had Sean been violent with you before this? Cassie said, yeah. Had you told him before that you wanted to not do freak-offs anymore? Cassie said, yes. You said you needed GHB? Yes, and that 2 S workers are available. I wrote, only Paul available, or Jake the white guy, but he can't do until 11. The other guy can do earlier. It's just one more person knowing our secret. They asked, what did that mean? Cassie said that they would know about our freak-offs. Then they asked, what is a SLS? She said, it's a hotel in Hollywood. Then they asked, when did Diddy first hurt you, physically? Cassie said it started in the first year. What staff were present when Sean was physical with you? When did Sean first use violence on you? Cassie said, in New York City. We were in a car with his security and he knocked me around. In January 2009, did you attend an event in LA with Diddy? Cassie said, yeah. What happened when you left? Cassie said, I'd been speaking to a producer about music. Diddy called me an SLUT. I hit him in the face. I had been drinking. Did you see any injuries? Cassie said, no. I was on the floor of the car and he hit my face for 10 minutes. Then I tried to get away, but Sean's security brought me back. They told me to go to a hotel. They snuck me into the hotel covered up so no one could see my face. I was at the hotel for a week, maybe a little more. An assistant brought me ice cream. She's then asked, did you feel like you could leave the hotel? Cassie said, no. I understood his capability, his access to firearms, the threats he made, and this assault incident was actually reported. So they asked, did you know that this assault was reported? Cassie said, I know that there was a blind item on the internet without our names. Again, it was reported to the cops. Who raised the blind item to you? Cassie said, my mother did. Now, a blind item is essentially an article, a news article, that describes something scandalous that happened with celebrities, but it doesn't name them by actual name. But again, she's staying at a specific hotel, the London hotel. So this blind item came out, this report came out that said this assault happened at the London hotel. And even though it didn't name her by name, obviously her mother knew where she was. So her mother asked if this was her. And Cassie said she didn't know it was me. This was before FaceTime was very popular, so I could hide myself. She asked if it was me. Then they said, what did you say? Cassie said, I said no. I didn't want my mother to know something of that magnitude and be in danger. When you went to a party with your girlfriends, what happened? Cassie said, I saw executives from BET. Then I heard that Diddy was there. What did you do? Cassie said, I left. I ran out as fast as I could. Why? I thought he was angry. Did he come to the hotel that you were staying at? Yes, and he attacked me and called me names. My face was bruised. Then they show a picture of Kid Cudi, and Cassie says we dated in 2011. Did Diddy find out? Yes, in my phone. Diddy went through my phone during a freak-off. He found an email. About what? About taking my toiletry bag to Kid Cudi's house the next day. Diddy put a wine opener in his hand and threatened me. I called Kid Cudi on a burner phone. Where did you go? I went to Kid Cudi's house. Then I talked with one of Diddy's assistants. And then what? Then I went to the house Diddy was staying at. He told me he would release videos and hurt Kid Cudi and I. What videos? Freak-off videos of me. Then Diddy attacked me, and then I went back to my hotel with the burner phone that I was texting Kid Cudi on. The room was torn up. Someone urinated on the floor, pooped in the toilet, and didn't flush it. It was gross. This was just before Christmas. I sent an email to my mom and Diddy's assistant from my flight to Boston and Connecticut. What did you write? That Diddy said he would release the tape of me on Christmas and he'd have Kid Cudi and I hurt. He said he would be out of the country then. What are these photographs? These are the photographs my mother took in Connecticut of the bruises on my back. Were you entirely honest with your mother about the abuse? Cassie said no. I said this was the first time. Did you tell her about the freak-offs? Cassie said no. Did anyone come visit you in Connecticut? Cassie said Kid Cudi did for a few days. I broke it off with him. It was too dangerous. Diddy said he would hurt both of us. Where did you go after Connecticut? I went to see Diddy. He was in Arizona with his son in college. I told my mother I was going to LA for work. So basically, Cassie started seeing Kid Cudi. This was around 2011. During a freak-off, Diddy went through Cassie's phone, found out that she was bringing a bag to stay at Kid Cudi's house. He freaked out. She left and went to Kid Cudi's house, then talked to Diddy's assistants. She was somehow talked into going back to Diddy's house, and he threatened to release freak-off videos that would obviously hurt her reputation and threatened to hurt Kid Cudi. Then he actually attacked Cassie, and then she went to her hotel, and then she booked a flight to visit her mother in Connecticut. Her mother took photos of her bruises. She told her mother this was the first time Diddy had attacked her. She didn't tell her about the freak-offs. She didn't tell her Diddy was holding these freak-off videos against Cassie's head. And then she ended up going back to visit Diddy in Arizona, but told her mother she was going to LA for work. And at the same time, she broke it off with Kid Cudi. Then they asked her, did Diddy talk about Kid Cudi's car? Cassie said, Diddy said he wanted Kid Cudi's friends to see Kid Cudi's car blown up. What happened next? We met. Diddy, Kid Cudi, and me. Kid Cudi said, what about my vehicle? And Diddy said, what vehicle? And that was the end of this meeting. They show more photos of Diddy and Cassie together, with Cassie having bruises on her. In 2015, there's a picture of her in Diddy's bathroom, and she said she was recuperating from being attacked by him a few days prior, and this was during an after party in their suite. During this after party, she's talking to a producer, a music producer, and Diddy tapped her on the shoulder. Then she says, he called me into our room and attacked me, kicked me as I tried to hide behind the toilet. What stopped the attack? D-Rock, his security, and James Cruz came in. It made D-Rock sad. What are these communications? They are from D-Rock to me. He writes, where are you at? It's time to ice your face. They ask, why? Cassie says, because I had just been attacked by Sean. Were these all the times that he attacked you? No, there were more. With who else did you see Sean be violent with? Cassie says, I saw him drag an assistant out of bed. I saw him hit someone in the head. One time in Turks and Caicos, he dragged a person. I believe we had a freak-off in Turks and Caicos. They ask about a specific apartment she lived in at 875 Comstock. Cassie says the 17th floor. They asked, did a friend stay with you? Cassie said yes. Diddy came and held her and threw her on the patio furniture on the balcony. I saw Sean, aka Diddy, bring her back in from the balcony and then throw her on the patio furniture. He also attacked my friend Carrie Morgan. Then they talk about pills. Cassie says Diddy would put the pills in a vitamin C bottle on the sink in the New York apartment. He'd say, you can take them. He had doctors who would write the scripts in the name of an assistant or in my name. You testified that your relationship with Diddy had ended in 2018. How was your health? Cassie said, I was sleepwalking. I had PTSD. This is a photo of my front door in 2018. I kept a knife there because Diddy was coming around a lot, so I had it. In August of 2018, what happened? Cassie said, we were having a closure conversation at a restaurant in Malibu. He was trying to convince me to go to Burning Man. Were you seeing anyone? Cassie said, my now husband. What happened next? Diddy came to my house and performed Grape on my living room floor. His eyes were black. It was like taking something from you. You cried. What did Diddy do? He continued and finished in me. Then he got up and left. She's then asked, did you ever have S with him again? Cassie says, yes, voluntarily. We had a good night. I went back to his house. Can you explain why you did that after he graped? We had been together for 10 years, Cassie says. Who did you stay in touch with? Cassie says, most people, though I pulled away. What did you message Diddy about after that? Cassie says, I was just checking in. And what did Diddy send you? Cassie says that he had iPads full of images and to get him his money. They ask, money back for what? Cassie says, for having paid for my now husband to be my trainer. What did you write back? Cassie says, do you want me to tell the truth? It's much deeper than iPads. There was abuse. There was more than freak-offs. There was a time I couldn't take the pain. Tried to walk out in traffic. My husband wouldn't let me. I had trauma therapy. So essentially, this is one of the most horrifying aspects of Cassie's entire testimony, where she recounts the time in August of 2018 when she was now dating her now husband, who was initially hired to be her trainer. Because remember, again, Diddy wanted her to be in shape for the freak-offs. They hire this trainer. Cassie falls in love with him. Diddy finds out. He threatens to leak the freak-off tapes, and he ends up going to her house and graping. Then the U.S. attorney asks, did you write about it? Cassie says, I did. I wrote a book with chapters. My mom helped. What did you want to do with the book? Cassie says, I wanted Diddy to read it. What pain did Diddy put you through? Cassie says, shame, to carry the things that were shameful for him. I took on a lot of responsibility for that I never should have. He brought the concept to me when I was 22. It was expected of me. I felt terrible. How did you get the chapters to Diddy? Cassie says, through my attorney. And I reached out to KK. I asked her if he read it. She said it was not taken seriously. How much did you ask for the book? Cassie says, I asked for $30 million. Did you sue? Cassie says, yes, in November of 2023. What happened with the lawsuit? Cassie says, it settled for $20 million in 24 hours. Why are you testifying in this trial? Cassie says, I can't take this anymore. I can't carry it. What's wrong is wrong. I tried people like they were disposable. S-workers, anybody. How many freak-offs did you have with Sean? Impossible to know. Hundreds. After you broke up with Diddy, did you ever do a freak-off? Cassie says no. And with that, there are no further questions. And that ends the line of questioning from the U.S. attorney to Cassie. And it concludes with her, of course, saying that she had written a book about all her traumas that Diddy did not take seriously. But with that book came a $30 million civil lawsuit, which, of course, if you've been keeping up, was released in November of 2023 and was settled within 24 hours with Diddy paying Cassie $20 million. She's now testifying in this federal case because she feels she can't keep this trauma within anymore. And what's wrong is wrong. And with that, we get into Cassie's cross-examination from Diddy's defense. The cross-examination of Cassie Ventura takes place on the 4th day of the Diddy trial, and like I mentioned earlier in this video, Brian Steele, one of the members of Diddy's defense team who was added onto the team quite late, was the one allegedly behind the decision of replacing a male cross-examiner with a female. As you can see by the subjects and questions that the U.S. attorney has already asked Cassie, these details are horrifying, right? And having a male attorney be the one to ask these extremely intimate, personal, S-related questions to Cassie, from Diddy's defense's perspective, it would create a more hostile, uncomfortable back and forth, which might not allow Diddy's defense to open Cassie up emotionally and get the right answers out of her that they want to hear, right? Plus, from Cassie's perspective as well, it'd probably be a lot harder answering a lot of these hard-hitting questions from a man when it was a man at the center of all of this abuse that she's detailing now. So all in all, it was a good idea to get a woman on the stand to cross-examine Cassie. And you'll see once Kid Cudi comes on the stand to testify, he is cross-examined by a man, none other than Brian Steele. But for now, let's focus on Cassie Ventura's cross-examination. The line of questioning was done by Diddy's defense lawyer, Ana Estavo. She starts off by asking, Cassie, you love Diddy, correct? Cassie said, I did. For 11 years, you took care of him? Cassie said, in some ways. You called him larger than life? Cassie said, I did. Others called him Diddy or Puff Daddy, but you called him Sean, right? Cassie said, yes. You knew a version of him the rest of the world couldn't see, right? Cassie said, in some ways. You kept coming back to him for 11 years. Cassie said, I wouldn't say quote unquote coming back. You believed he loved you too. Cassie said, I did believe he loved me too. So when he cheated on you, it hurt? Cassie said, not every time. Then they have Cassie read an email she sent Diddy in 2009, which read, I love you, smiley face. I'll fly anywhere for you. I love you. They read some other text message and email communications between Diddy and Cassie, with Cassie asking Diddy, you hungry, Pop Pop? And Diddy saying, we are so in love we don't do anything else. And this is in 2009, and Estavo asks Cassie, how long at this point had you guys been seeing each other? Cassie says, like 2.5 years. Then they have Cassie read another text where she wrote to Diddy, I haven't talked to you at all. You don't even try. You rushed me off the phone. I'm really hurt. I don't need your money. I need some attention. And then Diddy's defense and Cassie go back and forth. Diddy's defense says, you wanted your special time with Mr. Combs? Cassie says, yes. You testified that you told him, I love you so much you make me a better woman. Cassie said, I definitely wrote those messages. You wrote, I can't wait until we have a baby of our own. You knew that he had 6 children at the time, right? Cassie said, yes. So now, these messages about freak-off. When you say, you know, it doesn't matter to me, you mean weekend or weekday, either is fine? Cassie says, that's what it says. So here they're planning a freak-off in these text messages, and Diddy says, maybe we can call Jules, which is one of the S workers. And Cassie says she will call him. Then they get into some more explicit messaging. As they were talking about the freak-offs in these text messages, the conversation gets a little more vulgar. So Diddy's defense, Estavo, says, Cassie, this is from Diddy to you. You respond with an extremely explicit message, right? Cassie says, yes. This is 2 days after the planning of a freak-off, right? Cassie says, yes. He said, I want to see How did you reply? Cassie said, I can't wait either. Cassie, you wrote, I feel like I want to F, right? Cassie said, that is what it says. Mr. Combs said, I'm so horny I can't concentrate. What do you say? Cassie says, I told him that I'd go to the store for candles and then set up the room. Did you understand that he was going to take another video of you? And then the U.S. attorney comes in with an objection, but they continue their line of questioning. Cassie, you deleted videos on your devices, right? Cassie says, yes. What did you write? I wrote that I needed to feel this is my husband. This is the only one who will see this side of me. That's what she wrote to Diddy, essentially saying that she wanted Diddy to be the only one who had watched the F-offs. Then Diddy's defense asks, were you afraid that Diddy was only seeing you for sex in this way? Cassie says, that was a concern. You were still not public in your relationship with him at this point. Cassie says, correct. Were freak-offs important? Cassie says they were integral to us. Who was at your 21st birthday party in Las Vegas? Cassie says Britney Spears, Dallas Austin. How did you get them there? Cassie says they came for Diddy. Diddy's defense said, you're very beautiful and charming. And Cassie said, thank you. Diddy's defense said, it's true. Then they asked Cassie, after you signed with Bad Boy, things were still platonic between you and Diddy. And Cassie says, yes. That means they weren't actually in a romantic relationship. Then they ask her, you had a rough performance? Cassie says, yes, on 106 in Park. It didn't go well for me. Then they ask, how did Diddy help you after that? Cassie says, we did a YouTube video. He said, everybody makes mistakes. What was wrong? Cassie said, I couldn't hear myself. Then they ask her about her relationship with producer Ryan Leslie, who Cassie had been with before Diddy and who allegedly she left for Diddy. So they ask her, you were dating Mr. Leslie. How much older than you was he? Cassie says, 10 years. Then you traveled to Miami with Diddy. The flyer of the event was just a cover to spend time with Diddy, right? Cassie said, that's true. So I'm assuming that means she was supposed to go to Miami for a promotional event, but really that was a cover-up for her to just visit Diddy. Then they continue asking, you had a tattoo of Ryan Leslie's initials on your body. How many tattoos did you have at that point? Cassie says 3. They ask, the one on your arm, what is that? Cassie says it says, no regrets. Then they greatly switch up the topic of conversation with Estavio asking Cassie, Diddy taught you how to do oral S? Cassie said, he did. Then they go into reading more text conversations between Cassie and Diddy. These are from 2007, and Estavio tells Cassie, tell me when you're ready. Can you read it? Cassie says, you can read it. It's making me laugh. It's from 2007. So Estavio reads Cassie's text to Diddy, which said, I feel protected. You are sweet. You also wrote, I see that Carrie is better fitting for you. I'm hurt that you think I'm malicious. You're very important to me. X. Cass. And of course, Carrie is referring to Carrie Morgan, who was Cassie's friend. In this text, she's basically telling Diddy that she thought Diddy might have been more into her friend Carrie than into Cassie. And Cassie starts laughing as they read that text. And Estavio says, what are you trying to convey? Cassie said it's like a journal entry. You discussed Carrie Morgan. Did you think Diddy was attracted to her? Cassie says, there was a point in the very beginning. Did that complication carry on in your relationship? Cassie says, not really. Carrie was always just with us. Then they start talking about the freak-offs. Estavio asks Cassie, sometimes you wore a wig and a mask? Cassie said, yes. The general public did not know. No one knew until November of 2023 in the public about the freak-offs. Cassie said, yes. Fair to say his career was ruined after your lawsuit in November of 2023? Cassie said, I could understand that. Then Estavio said, let's read these messages. Diddy wrote to you, when are you on your period? Cassie said, no, now. What you be thinking about when you're HORNY? Not sure if I could say that on YouTube. So that was obviously Diddy asking Cassie on text what she thinks about when she's in that state. And Diddy's defense, Estavio again says, Cassie, if you don't want to read the answers, I can read them. And Cassie says, thank you. This is another reason why it's better that it's a woman cross-examining Cassie, because she could be more sensitive to the situation. So Estavio says, the O has lots of O's after them, right? Cassie says, yes. After a freak-off, you'd make love to Diddy? Cassie said, yes. Your period. Diddy is asking you when you're on it, right? Yup. He's asking in the context of when to meet up and have S. Cassie says, looks like it. Sometimes you watched him with a female? Cassie says, maybe 2 or 3 times. Did you talk with Diddy about the swingers lifestyle? Cassie said, just that no one really talks about it. Were you keeping these freak-offs secret from your friends? Cassie said, yes. Diddy's assistants would help him? Yes, they would help him with everything. So, Cassie, you would remember if an assistant came in during one of your sessions with an S worker, right? Cassie says, not necessarily. I was high. So you don't remember much? Cassie replied, I had my privacy invaded a lot during that relationship. I'm not completely sure why they're asking about Diddy's assistance in that capacity, like if they came in during the freak-offs. I'm assuming it's because, again, on the RICO count, they have to prove that his assistants, Diddy's assistants, were in on all of these crimes, right? So here, I guess, if Diddy's defense can prove that from what Cassie saw, Diddy's assistants were kind of just involved in everything related to his personal life and his career, then it doesn't seem like a criminal enterprise, but instead they were just basically helping him in his everyday life. Then they continue with more text messages. This is from July 2012. Cassie says to Diddy, I'm HORNY and bored. Then they ask her, this was after a freak-off, right? Cassie said, there are a lot of texts here. Apparently, there were about 25 pages worth of text messages that they were showing as they asked Cassie that question. They continue going, you said Diddy had often put you down, but he also sent you encouragement and called you queen, right? Cassie said, yes. What would trigger Diddy's incessant calls to you? Cassie said, anger, doubt about where I am. So basically, what would trigger Diddy to start calling Cassie obsessively, spamming her? Cassie said, whenever he was angry or doubted where I was. And again, the defendant's job here is to try to prove that this was just a very toxic relationship, not necessarily a case of Cassie forced against her will to do things that she didn't want to do. So they continue. If he suspected you of cheating, he'd call you consistently. That was one of the reasons. Again, trying to prove that this was a toxic relationship where they're both cheating and that's where the anger stemmed from. And it wasn't necessarily that Cassie was forced against her will or being threatened with violence to perform acts non-consensually. They continue. Do you believe Diddy has good taste? Cassie said, I think he does. He's had an impact on fashion, right? Cassie said, yeah, people like his style, Sean John. They ask, did you consult with him on your look? Cassie says, sometimes I got advice that I didn't ask for. He still ran his companies even while having all these freak-offs, right? Cassie said he did. Because again, she painted the picture, right, through her testimony that he controlled her life. Her life became these freak-offs. She couldn't focus on music because she had to recover from these freak-offs. The defense tries to spin it to say those freak-offs obviously didn't impact Diddy and stop him from running businesses, so Cassie could have done the same as well. They asked Cassie, what was Diddy addicted to? Cassie says success, and then she laughs. Then they say, what substances? Opiates? Cassie said, yes. He told me, and I saw it. Then they asked, did Diddy's mood depend on whether or not he was withdrawing from opiates? Cassie said he was more irritable, I would say. What other substances was Mr. Combs addicted to? What was his drug of choice? Cassie says MDMA. Would he do opiates daily? When he was doing them, yes, they were daily. You saw him withdraw? Yes. And here they're trying to paint the picture that Diddy only got violent and threatened Cassie when he was withdrawing. His mood would only get angry when he was coming off of substances. Then they show Cassie more pictures of text messages and say, Cassie, you wrote, I love our FOs when we both want it. And they ask her, you really felt that? Cassie said, loving FOs were just words at that point. Then they ask Cassie, Diddy wrote to you, I want to freak out right now. And you wrote that you wanted it too. You said, LOL, me too. Cassie said, I texted more than that. They say, but you did text him that. Diddy wrote to you, Jules is available if you are into it. You could have said yes or no. And you said, love you. Cassie said, there was no yes or no. Then they bring up a different conversation where Diddy wrote to Cassie, do I have your permission to set up freaky fun? And Cassie replied to him saying, ovulation. They continue with a bit of further conversation that's not so important, essentially just Cassie saying she's going to get outfits for an FO, lingerie, lubricants, etc. Diddy says, have fun, impress me. Cassie says, okay. Diddy says, can we kiss a lot? Cassie says, yes. Then she wrote, I left the iPad. She testified that she didn't know which iPad she was talking about. Then Diddy writes, I'll be there right after my session. This was June 2017. So they ask her, do you remember arguments you were having at that time? Cassie says, not specifically. Then in further conversations in that time period, Cassie says, the game starts at 10 p.m., no breaking character to 8 a.m. So they ask her, what exactly are you talking about in these texts? Cassie says, this was a game that a friend of mine told me about, and it's used as a way to rekindle your romance. So they ask her, what, by doing something different in the bedroom? Cassie says, it's a whole, getting into character thing. They continue reading the text. Diddy said in the text, let's get some outfits and go to an S club. Then they start asking about Kim Porter and some of Diddy's other exes, specifically asking Cassie, did you come to know that Diddy was leaving Freak-Offs to go see Kim Porter? Cassie says yes. How did you find out about Gina? How'd you feel? Did it upset you? Cassie said yes. Did it prompt arguments? Cassie said it did. And when Diddy thought that you weren't faithful, what were his reactions? Cassie replies, it was scary. Then they review some more texts where Diddy wrote to Cassie, let's do something different in New York City this weekend. FYI, Dave hit me. And they ask Cassie, what does hit mean? Cassie says, reached out. Diddy also texts Cassie saying, you better put me on VIP vibrate alarm or something. And they ask her, Diddy's frustrated that you don't answer his text fast enough? Cassie says, right. You tell him to come to NYC, understanding that there could be a freakout. Cassie said, maybe. You also saw the Book of Mormon? Cassie laughs and says, yes. And they ask Cassie a couple more questions about these texts, and Cassie stops them and says, this is not about what I felt, right? Because you're skipping over a lot of texts here. And then they ask her, what did you write? Cassie said, as much as you think you're Bruce Willis, you're not. Your kids were babies when we started dating. So this is Cassie, obviously in the text messages, talking to Diddy, obviously about him being unfaithful to her. So they ask her, if you saw Diddy on social media on vacation with another woman, was it heartbreaking? Cassie said it could be. I was 7 years into this relationship at the point of the text that you're reading. And what about this, about Gina? You wrote, I don't want to be a side piece, but I'll treat you as a king. You want it to be the main girlfriend? Cassie replied, yes, you're reading text from 2013, and at that point, I did. Then they continue, you saw social media posts of Diddy with other girlfriends and got angry, right? Cassie said, can I speak? I was jealous of certain situations. Did there come a time where Diddy suspected you were in a relationship with someone in the industry? Mr. Muscuddy, aka Kid Cudi? Cassie said yes. Diddy thought it could be good for your career if you collaborated with Kid Cudi. So why did your relationship build with Kid Cudi? Cassie said we enjoyed each other's company. But weren't you in a relationship with Diddy? Cassie said we were on a break, but you were still doing freak-offs with him. Cassie said yes. So after Diddy found out by going through your phone, you went to see Diddy. You knew he was upset he previously attacked you. Cassie said yes. I thought I'd be safer with other people there. Your affair with Kid Cudi was only a month long, but you got a burner phone for it? A burner phone is like a second phone, so that Diddy couldn't see she was texting Kid Cudi. Cassie replies, yes, I got a burner phone. Mr. Combs, aka Diddy, kicked you in the back? Cassie says yes. This came up later in your relationship that you had cheated on him with Kid Cudi? Cassie said, he brought it up quite a bit. Sometimes when Diddy would cheat, he would say, well, you had an affair with Kid Cudi. Then they asked Cassie, Diddy suspected you of having an affair with another person in the industry. You were in South Africa filming, right? Cassie says, yes, Honey 3, and then she laughs. I'm not sure what Honey 3 is, but they continue. While you were there, you saw a photo of Diddy with Gina, and you were irate, right? Cassie corrects her and says, I was angry. You blocked Diddy and focused on the movie, right? Cassie said, I tried my best. Diddy suspected you of a relationship with whom? Cassie says, Michael B. Jordan. You sent a video of not only Diddy, but also to staff. Who? D-Rock? Cassie says yes. They ask her, you sent it to them because you were angry with all of them? Cassie said, I was hurt. I spent all my time with them. Estavio responds by saying, you thought they were in on it. Then she asks Cassie, the physical abuse, when did your father learn about it? Cassie responds by saying, the same time as my mother. Did Diddy come to Connecticut to speak to your parents? Cassie said, I don't know if it was at this time that you're talking about. Because again, they're referencing around 2013. Then Cassie says that Carrie Morgan also knew about the abuse. Again, Carrie Morgan was one of Cassie's friends who at the beginning of her relationship with Diddy, she was a bit jealous that she thought Diddy might have liked Carrie more than her because they hung out all the time. Then Cassie's asked, the eyebrow gash incident, what was that about? Cassie said, I didn't answer the phone and I went to sleep. I was supposed to be packing for a trip. Estavio says, Diddy was inebriated? Cassie says, I don't remember that. Because again, they're trying to make it seem like he got really violent when he was on drugs and then got really angry when he was withdrawing from them. The drugs were the trigger for his behavior. Then Cassie's asked, why were you asleep? Cassie said, a drink at the Abbey had something in it, I think. Then she's asked, did Diddy ever abuse you while he was inebriated? Then say he didn't remember it? Cassie said, yes. Did you feel he was not taking responsibility? Cassie said, yes. For drugs, you'd both go to rehab? Cassie said, rehab wasn't really a thing during our relationships. The freak-offs were an opportunity for you to take drugs together? Cassie said, yes. You also went to Burning Man a lot? Yes. Did you guys call yourselves Get High Partners? Cassie said, we did. Did you take drugs from him without him knowing it? Yes. What was his reaction? Explosive. Did he tell LA dealers not to deal to you? Cassie said, yes. You told Mrs. Coram that you learned only after the fact that Diddy had dangled Mrs. Bongolan off the balcony. Cassie said, I'm not sure. Were you on drugs? I'm not sure. You got a life coach for your drug use, according to this document. Cassie said, I don't know who that person is. You were doing a lot of drugs. Cassie said, it was a rough time. You tried to get into rehab. The Golden Door? Cassie said it was a spa. There was a time I lost all sense of smell and taste and woke up in a hospital with an IV in my arm. I tried to get help then. The time after San Bernardino, you learned that Diddy had overdosed? Cassie said, a very strong opiate. Yes. Were you ever not addicted to painkillers? Cassie said, we took Ibogaine. Where did you get it? Cancun, Mexico, separately? When Diddy threw you off the boat in Canes, when he accused you of taking drugs and squeezed your leg, Cassie said, amongst other things, aka that wasn't all he did. And then they asked her, but you still wanted to be with him? Cassie said, I did. Switching topics, when you say Mr. Combs, aka Diddy, went with firearms to find Suge Knight, do you remember telling the government that you did go with them? Cassie said, no. Let me show you. Cassie emphasizes, I did not go with them, so I don't think I said that. Then she's asked, you also did substances with Miss Morgan, right? That's Carrie Morgan. Cassie said, yes. Do you recall telling the government that you did not see what Diddy did to her, hitting her in the head with a wooden hanger? Cassie said, I saw the hanger. I saw he was angry that I was doing substances with Carrie. Then she's asked, this broke up your 17-year friendship with Carrie? Cassie said it did. Did you tell Diddy about your relationship with your now husband? Cassie said no. Mrs. Morgan sued you and Diddy? Cassie said she made a demand. And you paid part of that? Cassie said I did. And you haven't spoken to her since. Maybe one text. So essentially, Diddy had hit Carrie Morgan with a hanger because he was angry that she was doing substances with Cassie. We'll get more detail on this later in the trial, but essentially this incident broke up their 17-year friendship, and Carrie had made a demand to Diddy and Cassie that they pay for damages, and Cassie ended up paying part of that alongside Diddy, and they have not spoken since. And so she's then asked, this was the relationship ender? Cassie says yes. You would heat up the baby oil? Cassie said, yeah. Then they start going into text messages from March 2016, just a day or two before the Intercontinental Hotel assault incident. Of course, the one that the security guard already testified about, the one that there's footage about. Remember that the fight started because Cassie left a freak off early because she wanted to attend a movie premiere. Diddy comes out into the hallway in just a towel and attacks her. The security guard comes up, Diddy offers money, etc. So about one day before that incident happened, they're reading text messages between Cassie and Diddy. Diddy's defense asks Cassie, you sent him an explicit message? Cassie says yes. He responded with a number of M's. He wrote, too bad you have to work, LOL. Cassie said, yes, that's what Diddy said. Then you ask him, are you feeling better? Then he's discussing bodily function. Cassie says yes. Diddy went to your premiere lunch at London Hotel? Cassie says he did. Then he says, I just got out of a spiritual therapy session. Cassie asked, how did it go? He said, it's a process. This is leading up to the hotel incident. Cassie says on the text, baby, I want to FO so bad. So they asked Cassie, you were asked in your direct, you said you didn't want to ruin your premiere. Cassie says, sure. Again, right? She wanted to leave the freak-off they were having at the Intercontinental Hotel to make it to her movie premiere. They're reading text messages from about a day before that incident. So Diddy had said on text, if we start at 7 p.m. and go until 4 a.m., you can still get some rest after. He's saying it'd be shorter than the usual freak-off? Cassie said, that's how I would understand it. What do you say? Cassie said, I replied to him saying, Carrie is here. We can't do the FO at my house. Do you remember the beginning of this freak-off in the Intercontinental? Cassie says, not really. The drugs were bad MDMA, right? Cassie says, I have no idea. And with that, the fourth day of the trial wraps up, and we lead into the fifth. With the fifth day, the cross-examination continues, and the day starts off with Diddy's defense saying we don't understand why the prosecutors are objecting to certain pieces of evidence that we're bringing into the court. So the prosecutor says, they're proposing to use a video of Diddy walking in nature, talking about God. It is improper. Invited jury nullification. Diddy's defense replies saying, this was about Diddy being in rehab, which Cassie didn't remember, so we want to refresh her recollection with this. The prosecutor replies, it cannot be played for her in front of the jury. Essentially, they want to use a video of Diddy walking in nature, talking about God, to show Cassie, look, Diddy really was in rehab because she didn't necessarily remember it. So now they continue with their cross-examination of Cassie. They ask her, you believe Diddy was blackout for the Intercontinental event, aka the freak-off? Cassie says, I believe he was intoxicated. Everyone's definition is different. But you said blackout. What did you write here in this text message? Cassie said, I wrote, when you get effed up the wrong way. Diddy's defense said, you meant drugs? Cassie said, and alcohol. Here, Diddy writes to you, I am so HORNY for you. Here, Diddy's asking you for S soon after the Intercontinental, right? Cassie said, I was saying who he felt. What did you write back? I wrote, we need a different vibe than Friday at the Intercontinental. So this is after that attack happened at the Intercontinental, right? She's saying we need a different vibe than that day. And Diddy writes, F that day. I don't ever want to do that again. Cassie replies saying LOL true to Diddy. Then they ask her, Diddy suspected you of having an affair with someone else in the industry. What happened when he took your phone? Cassie said, we were in a car and he told me to call my mother. When I did, he grabbed my phone and took it. It was a big fight? Cassie replied, he was just gone for a few hours until my mother called the police. Did Diddy go through your phone? Cassie said, I think so, and he called someone on it. The person you had an affair with? An NFL player? Cassie said, I don't know if he's playing anymore. Diddy's defense said, well, he was an NFL player. And Diddy was jealous. Wasn't there a time he found out you were dancing with another person in the entertainment industry and took your phone? Cassie said, I don't remember. Diddy's defense said, it was Chris Brown. Cassie said, I was not dancing with him. Look at this, it's from 2013. Cassie said, now I see. Then they ask, what else did Diddy take? Cassie said, my car, my passport when he was angry. Let's refresh you about Diddy being in rehab. Cassie said, I vaguely remember. Then they ask her, why did you go to Sedona? She said, I went to Arizona to get away from the substances. Then they switched topics, I believe still reading text messages, and Diddy's defense says, Diddy told you to get the video that you heard about. What did you write? Cassie said, I wrote, you keep putting me down. Then Diddy's defense plays some audio of a conversation between Cassie and Diddy, and the conversation goes like this. Cassie says, if you saw a video of someone effing me, who was effing me? You have it. Why didn't you show me? Diddy said, because I'm not disrespectful, bro. Cassie replied to Diddy in this audio saying, if you don't show me, I will unalive you, cut you up. I will effing unalive you. I've never unalived anyone in my life. I'm going to F you up. It's not going to be blood on my hands. Someone else is going to do it. I'm not playing with you, Sujit. Tell me. My apologies. It's not specified here, but this doesn't seem like it was a conversation between Diddy and Cassie. It seems like it was a conversation between Cassie and an individual by the name of Sujit. So, Diddy's defense says, this was you, Cassie, right? Cassie says yes. Did Diddy express concern about these videos being released? Cassie says when? They say ever. Cassie says yes, he did express concerns. Then they say the male S-worker, Jonathan, you thought he took a video? Cassie says yes. Did he spend a lot of money to make sure the video did not get released? I don't know. You had a conversation with Jonathan Audie that was transcribed. Cassie says, I'm not sure. He was volatile? Cassie says, I didn't trust him. What did Diddy say when you told him you thought Mr. Audie was recording? That's the male S-worker. Cassie said, Diddy said he would take care of it. Are you aware of an S-worker leaving comments on Diddy's Instagram page? Cassie said, I'm not. Now let's talk about rehab. Cassie, did you get neurofeedback therapy? Cassie says yes. They say, what is it? Cassie says, they hook something up to your head and show you things. See how you react. Were you told the effects of it? Cassie said, it would help me with my trauma. She also says she participated in EMDR, which is basically something that helps you recall memories and process them. Essentially, you recall prior traumatic memories, like for PTSD. And so they ask Cassie, you were being treated for PTSD? Cassie says, yes. I was still physically developing. Diddy's defense says, but you were 22. Cassie says, women keep developing after 22, don't you think? But you're not suggesting you were still physically developing after 22. Cassie says, no, I'm not. Then they go back into text message communications between Diddy and Cassie, and Diddy's defense says, Diddy wrote, you're so predictable. Cassie, you said you were going to tell him that you didn't want to do freak-offs anymore, but you didn't say it, did you? Cassie said, no, I did not. Here, you were suggesting freaking off with a girl. You say you found a photo of Diddy with Gina while you were staying with your parents in Connecticut, right? Cassie says, yes. You decided to break up with him. And he didn't threaten you, but suggested couples counseling? Cassie said, I don't know. Then they ask, in August of 2018, you called it a closure conversation. Diddy was inviting you to Burning Man, right? Cassie says, yes. So now they read text messages between Diddy and Cassie. Diddy says, you have anger. Cassie wrote, my family knows. I'm not running around telling our business. I don't need you to be taking care of Kim and Gina. I needed you to put me first. You lied to me. She never went away. It was the nail in the coffin. And then Diddy's defense says, you were talking about Gina, right? Cassie says yes. And again, this text message conversation is in 2018, right when they had their closure conversation. So then they continue going on asking Cassie, in your civil lawsuit, you say Diddy raped you in September of 2018 after you had dinner at an Italian restaurant in Malibu, right? Cassie says yes. Did you meet with the US government on November 30th, 2023? Cassie said yes, but not the exact date. In this meeting, you said the RAPE took place after Diddy returned from Burning Man. You said he was acting strangely at that dinner. Cassie said, I don't remember exactly that word. Did you meet the US government on April 8th, 2025? Cassie said, around then. Then they show text messages and they ask Cassie, this message to FB, who's that? Cassie says, Frank Black, a name that Diddy used. Diddy wrote, I'm in an investors conference. We'll get back to this. Then they ask Cassie, you still have love for him? Cassie says, I have love for the past and what it was. Then they say, Cassie, you wrote in this text message, I didn't mean to be a B word. I just don't get the time. Diddy writes, just need you to be positive. Then they show more text message screenshots and they say, this is about a yoga instructor? Cassie says, yes. Then they ask Cassie, what did you write? Cassie said, I wrote, I've stopped even caring. But you did care. Cassie says, yes, I did. So he said, you could date other people. Let's just talk about it, correct? Cassie says, yes, that's what Diddy said. And what did you write? Cassie said, I wrote, I do love you. I would just prefer not being one of your girlfriends. Let's get up tomorrow night. I'll do studio from 6 to 9. Then Diddy writes, can I hold you or are you just going to break up with me? And Cassie writes back, we can embrace LOL. And then they ask Cassie, and you wanted to hug him, right? Cassie said, that's what I said. Did you have intercourse with Mr. Combs that night? Cassie said, I did. And again, this is after she claims that Diddy had RAPED'd her. And during that intercourse you had with Diddy that night, your now husband had FaceTimed you? Cassie said, yes. Then they ask her, your husband, your current husband, didn't know that you were with Diddy at the time in 2018, right? And again, she was dating her husband at the time, and Diddy had RAPED'd her according to Cassie, and then they had consensual intercourse about a month later, and during that time, Cassie's now husband had FaceTimed her. And so they're asking, your husband didn't know that you were with Diddy at the time? Cassie says, I don't know what he knew. So they ask her, your husband didn't know that you were RAPED'd? Cassie said he didn't know that evening, aka the evening that he FaceTimed Cassie while she was with Diddy. Then they ask her, after Kim Porter, aka Diddy's ex-wife's memorial service, you wrote to him that you were going home. You asked why he called Kim his soulmate and what was the 11 years all about. Cassie says, yes, that's what I wrote. They ask her, was that hurtful? Cassie says, at the time, yes. And after that memorial service, you never saw Diddy again, right? Cassie says, I did not. They say, he let you go, right? Cassie said, I never saw him again. I don't know about letting me go. You got married to the love of your life, right? And with that, they take a break. And when they come back, they ask Cassie about texts that her and Diddy had after Kim's memorial service. So just to kind of catch you guys up to what's going on exactly, in 2018 is when Cassie and Diddy had interacted for the last time. Cassie claims that they had a closure conversation at a restaurant. Diddy then came to her house and RAPED'd her. A few weeks after that, they did meet again and have relations consensually. And during that time, Cassie was seeing her now husband, and he FaceTimed Cassie while she was with Diddy consensually, but he did not know exactly what was going on at the time. Then Kim Porter passes away, Diddy's ex-wife. During the memorial service, Diddy calls her his soulmate. Cassie, via text, essentially implies that that hurt her at the time, and she doesn't understand what all the 11 years are for. And now they're reviewing text conversations during that time when Cassie and Diddy had essentially parted ways. So they read Diddy's message first, which said, you're going to make a beautiful mother. God bless. And Cassie said, thank you. God bless. Then Cassie wrote, we should talk and have closure. Diddy sends back a tear face emoji, and he said, you were always my ride or die. Cassie said, I thought it was nice. They asked her, you had been craving that? Cassie said, before. I don't think I was craving now. Then they asked, who shaped you over 11 years? You shaped each other? Cassie said, yes. Your husband's a physical trainer? Cassie said, yes. The house you grew up in Connecticut was relatively modest compared to mansions? Cassie says, yes. You were preparing to tour with Matt Testa? Cassie says, yes, he's an engineer. Once you settled your lawsuit, you canceled the tour, right? Cassie says, yes, because you no longer needed the money. Cassie said, that's not the reason. So again, this is Diddy's defense asking Cassie these questions, right? And of course, Cassie sued Diddy in November 2023. They settled for $20 million. At first, she had been planning to do a tour, and after that lawsuit, she canceled the tour. So Diddy's defense here is trying to paint the picture like maybe she was financially incentivized to hold her experience with Diddy over his head. And they try to prove that by the fact that she obviously wanted some money by going on tour. She lived in a modest house in Connecticut. And once she got the $20 million settlement from the Diddy lawsuit, she ended up canceling the tour. But Cassie said that was not the reason why she canceled the tour. Then they ask her, after the hotel video came out, you posted on Instagram that domestic violence is the issue, right? Cassie said, yes, I still feel that way. Then they show more text messages where Diddy writes, want to freak off one last time? And Cassie writes, I don't want it to be the last time. I want to freak off for the first time. It doesn't specify what date she had actually sent that text, but they ask her, Cassie, you were shown this message where you ended, I don't want to freak off for the last time. I want to freak off for the first time for the rest of our lives. What did you say after that? Cassie said, yes, I'm HORNY. Just got over a UTI. You were shown messages today in which you and Diddy were kind and loving. Cassie says, yes. Did those periods ever last? Cassie says, no, those kind moments never lasted. There was a downstring. Then they ask her, what world did Diddy open up to you? Cassie said, a world of chaos. In your 11-year relationship, who did you want to have S with? Cassie says, only him at that time. When Diddy wrote, seduce me all day, what did you do? Cassie said, I wrote about freak-offs. Were you able to cancel work obligations for freak-offs? Cassie said, yes, if I was told to. When you were shooting the movie in South Africa and you blocked him, how did he contact you? Cassie said, through Mia, which I believe is one of Diddy's assistants. Then they asked her, Diddy said he didn't remember hurting you. Did you believe him? Cassie said, not always, because I knew him. There were times he was pretty aware of what he was doing. It's just who he was. I'd seen him be violent with other people. On the way back from Kane's, what did Diddy do? Cassie said, he played a video of me having S with an S worker. What did he say he would do? Cassie said, Diddy said he would release it. When you got to New York, what did Diddy ask for? Cassie said he asked for a freak-off or else he'd release the videos. When Diddy wrote, you ready for tonight, what did he mean? Cassie said he meant a freak-off. Then they asked, do you have any doubt that Diddy had RAPED'd you? Cassie said, I have no doubt. Then they asked her, after Diddy RAPED'd you on August 18th, did you later have consensual intercourse with Diddy during which your now husband had FaceTimed you? Cassie said yes. Why did you cancel the tour? After I filed my civil lawsuit, I was overwhelmed. Addressing the past the way that I chose to was overwhelming. I didn't want to go on tour. Do you plan to file more lawsuits? Cassie said no. Would you give the $20 million back if it meant you hadn't had to do freak-offs? Cassie said, I would give it back to get my agency back. Did he attack you during freak-offs? Cassie says yes, and she starts crying. Were you open to freak-offs at the beginning? Cassie says yes, at the beginning. And keep in mind, this is now the U.S. attorney, the prosecutor, asking Cassie these questions. It's no longer Diddy's team. So then they ask her, you were open to freak-offs at the beginning. When did you tell him you no longer wanted to do them? Cassie said, I told him more than once. What concerns did you have about saying no to freak-offs? Cassie said, safety, career, love. Then Anna Estavio, Diddy's defense lawyer, comes in to question Cassie again, saying, you knew Diddy's S preference was these freak-offs, right? Cassie said, I later learned. They said, it was part of being his girlfriend. Cassie said, yeah, it was. You kept your old device? Cassie said, yes. And freak-off videos, in this case, they were all on those devices you kept from 2012 to 2014. Cassie said, I don't know what year the devices and the freak-offs were from. You were able to stand at his side at the Met Gala. Being his girlfriend gave you access to producers. Cassie said, yes. Beyond Kid Cudi, what other musicians were you in the studio with? Were you put in the studio with Nicki Minaj? Cassie says, yes. And Lil Wayne, Rick Ross, Pusha T. Am I forgetting any names? Cassie said, yeah, you forgot a lot of names. Are you self-conscious about your musical talent? Cassie says, I wouldn't say that. You had a bad performance on 106 in Park. Cassie said, yeah, early in my career. You did music videos. Were they successful? Then the judge asks for a brief sidebar, and they come in asking Cassie more questions like, Diddy's security, D-Rock, was like a member of your family? Cassie said, yes, like a brother. The assistant Mia, you also had a friendship with? Cassie said, yes. You stated that you were feeling overwhelmed after filing your civil lawsuit, right? Cassie says yes. You recently received a settlement from the Intercontinental? Cassie said no. But you made a demand? Cassie says yes. $10 million maybe. So she's demanding $10 million from the Intercontinental Hotel, the one where she tried to escape a freak-off, and of course Diddy attacked her. And then they begin to wrap up this cross-examination, and Diddy's defense says, this is the last thing that I'll ask you to read, Cassie. So Cassie says thank you, and she reads the text that she sent to Diddy, which said, we need closure and understanding. Then the U.S. attorney asked Cassie, why'd you keep your devices? Cassie said, I was afraid of what was on them. I wouldn't take them to the Apple store because, again, there was freak-off videos on those devices that Cassie had owned. So she was afraid to, I guess, dispose of them. Then Diddy's defense comes in with one more question saying, you just reached $10 million settlement with the Intercontinental last week before the trial? And Cassie says, yes. so she settled for $10 million with the hotel. And with that marks the end of Cassie's testimony, and we now proceed to various other witnesses, including Diddy's former artists and even Kid Cudi. So with that being said, let's get into the next dark step of the Diddy trial. So the first week of the Diddy trial wraps up with another witness taking the stand, this one being Special Agent Yasin Binda. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. This individual is being questioned by the U.S. attorney, aka the prosecutor, and they ask, "Where do you work?" The special agent says, "HSI, in the human trafficking group. I'm in the crisis negotiation group too. Did you serve subpoenas in this case?" The special agent says, "Yes." Then they ask, "When Diddy was arrested, where did you go?" The agent says, "The Park Hyatt, room 2115, where Diddy was staying." "And what did you do?" "We assigned a letter to each room and began to search." "What was your role?" "I took photographs of the items, then signed them." Then the prosecutor shows a picture of plastic bags full of Johnson & Johnson baby oil and Astroglide bottles, and they say, "Was this found in the closet?" The special agent says, "Several bottles of baby oil were found in the bathroom." And now in the bedroom, what was found in the Louis Vuitton bag? They say, "Medication in the name of Frank Black." Again, Cassie corroborated that this was also a name Diddy went by, an alias. They show more photos and say, "What is this?" The special agent says, "Bags of pink powder found in the medicine bottle." After doing tests, it was found to be horse tranquilizer and MDMA. And again, this is the hotel that Diddy was arrested in, right? So as he's being arrested, that very same day, he's in a hotel room, and the special agent that searched the hotel room once he was arrested found a bunch of baby oil bottles and this substance that contained horse tranquilizer. This was the day that Diddy got arrested. There was also a black mini bag full of $9,000. Then we get another major witness to the stand, this one being Don Richard, who had been part of a group with Diddy called Dirty Money. If you guys remember his 2010 album, Last Train to Paris, this was one of the singers who was part of the Dirty Money collective that collaborated with Diddy quite heavily on that project. I remember being quite young when that album released. There was a lot of hits on that project. The massive hit, I'm Coming Home. I don't know if you guys remember that, but at the time, Diddy released that album under the moniker Diddy and Dirty Money. Don Richard was part of the group Dirty Money. So they ask her, "From 2004 to 2011, who did you work for?" Don Richard says, "I worked for Diddy." "In 2009, did you observe an incident between Diddy and Cassie?" Don Richard said, "She was attacked by Sean Combs, kicked." "Did you see more violence by him against Cassie?" Don Richard said, "Yes, quite often." "When were you a member of this group?" And the U.S. attorney shows a picture of the Dirty Money group. So Don Richard said, "I was a member of the group from 2009 to 2011. Then they say the incident in 2009 when Diddy beat Cassie. Where was it?" Don Richard said, "It was in Diddy's LA home. We were recording." "What did Diddy do?" Don Richard said, "He was saying, 'Where the F is my food?' He grabbed a black skillet with eggs and tried to hit her over the head. Cassie dropped to the ground." "And what did Cassie do?" Don Richard says she went into fetal position. Diddy was assaulting her, dragged her up to the first floor, glass breaking and yelling. "I was scared for her, and I was scared for me too." "Did you intervene?" Don Richard said, "No." "Do you call the police?" "No." The next day, what happened? Now, Don Richard here doesn't specify if it's Cassie or Diddy that told her this, but she says, "What happened was it has been passionate and she was okay, aka Cassie was okay, that it would be better if we didn't talk, that people could end up missing." So the U.S. attorney says, "How did you understand that?" Don Richard said, "Unaliving." And then Diddy's defense comes in with an objection. And that, my friends, wraps up week 1 of the Diddy trial. However, week 2 picks up right where week 1 left off at. More witnesses are called to the stand, people close in Diddy's inner circle, people who worked with him, and people who were victim to his brutal wrath. So lawbreeds and gentlegrams, with that being said, let's hop in to week 2 of the horrifying Diddy trial. So week 2 of the Diddy trial kicks off with Don Richard of Dirty Money going back on the stand. Don Richard testifies that she frequently saw Diddy be violent with Cassie. She describes 2 more instances, along with the frying pan incident, of Diddy allegedly attacking Cassie. One incident took place at a Central Park concert where Don Richard said she saw Diddy hit Cassie in the face with a closed fist. Another incident took place in 2010 in West Hollywood at a restaurant where Diddy, Cassie and other Bad Boy employees and celebrities were present. Don Richard described seeing Diddy hit Cassie in the stomach, and Cassie was immediately bent over. Diddy then told Cassie to leave. During government questioning, Don Richard had said that the reasons that Diddy allegedly attacked Cassie had varied. It could be Cassie sticking up for herself, it could be random, it could be her having an opinion. Don Richard named another Diddy employee who had allegedly witnessed this violence, including former Bad Boy executive Harvey Pierre, assistants Capricorn Clark and Mia, and an alleged victim of Diddy's who is expected to testify, as well as security staff like D-Rock and Roger Bonds. So a lot of Diddy's crew had been privy and witnessed the attacks against Cassie from Diddy. Now Don Richard proceeds to get cross-examined by a member of Diddy's defense team, and this individual will be Nicole Westmoreland. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. Now, Nicole is a black female attorney, and Diddy had reportedly been seeking to include a black female attorney on his legal team. Nicole joined the team quite recently, actually, just a few weeks ago when they were actually selecting the jury for the trial. She herself is also a victim of assault. She's the one cross-examining Don Richard, and she begins by interrogating her about her testimony on Friday, the last day of the first week of the trial. If you guys recall, that Friday afternoon, Don Richard had described an incident in 2009 where she saw Diddy attempt to throw a frying pan at Cassie, then attack her and drag her up the stairs. Nicole referenced two other interviews that Don Richard gave to her lawyers and then to the government that concerned the skillet incident. Diddy's attorney Nicole had questioned Don Richard on why her description of the event was different in the conversations with the government and her lawyers versus the one that she gave on the stand. To her lawyers, Don Richard described Diddy actually hitting Cassie with the frying pan, but to the government, she told them that Diddy had thrown eggs at Cassie. So she's telling three different stories here, right? So Nicole asks, would you agree with me that it's been hard for you to keep your story the same in reference to the egg incident? Don Richard said, no, I wouldn't agree with that. And she added that she was sharing her recollections to the best of her ability. Nicole also pointed out that Don Richard did not tell the government about the firearms that she said she saw in Diddy's possession, but she said it was because she wasn't asked. Another alleged incident of Diddy being violent towards Cassie that was included in Don Richard's lawsuit, because on a side note, before she actually went up to testify for this federal case, Don Richard filed a civil lawsuit against Diddy. And in that lawsuit, there was an incident that Don Richard had included about Diddy being violent towards Cassie, but she didn't mention it during her testimony in this federal case. And her lawyer says this was a misquote. Then Diddy's defense team asks Don Richard to revisit her previous testimony and interviews where she talks about Diddy's drug use. Don Richard said on the stand that she has seen Diddy do white powder. She previously told investigators that she hadn't seen it. So again, a lot of flip-flopping between what she's saying here versus what she said in the past. Now, something that may come up as this trial progresses is the fact that Don Richard has testified that there were others that witnessed Diddy's alleged assaults on Cassie. In 3 instances she described on the stand, Don Richard says she was with Kalena Harper, who was in the group Dirty Money, along with her and Diddy. However, that woman, Kalena Harper, has denied ever witnessing Diddy be abusive. Last September, after Don Richard filed a lawsuit against Diddy, Harper posted on her Instagram account saying, while I fully respect Don's right to recount her experiences, I want to emphasize that her accounts reflects her own personal perspective and should not be interpreted as a universal truth applicable to everyone involved. So now Diddy's defense is trying to depict Don Richard as a witness who is loose with details about the physical violence that she said she witnessed roughly 15 years ago in various accounts that she's given over the years. So they ask her, at this point, you would agree with me, we have seen several story changes, right? And then there's an objection which stops Don Richard from actually answering that question. So right now, whatever stories Don Richard is telling, they're meant to align with the aspects of Cassie's testimony from last week, right? Because the timelines kind of add up. Cassie had said the violence started about a year after her relationship with Diddy. Don Richard, part of Dirty Money, was around Cassie and Diddy about 2 years or 3 years after their relationship had started. So if she could kind of depict similar events to what Cassie was describing, then the prosecutors have a case for this being repeated behavior. But if Diddy's defense team is successful at chipping away at Don Richard's reliability, the jury could discredit what she has to say about the alleged past events, right? Nicole Westmoreland, again, part of Diddy's defense team, is suggesting that key components of Don Richard's testimony were omitted, aka not mentioned, from at least some of Don Richard's interviews with prosecutors as they prepared the case. Dawn Richard may not have mentioned at points things that she says at trial, like the fact that she saw Diddy carrying a firearm and doing white powder. And again, Dawn Richard's civil lawsuit against Diddy is still pending, and the defense is trying to use that as a fact to show that she has motive to lie about her former employer, aka Diddy. It's also important to note that throughout the first week of the trial, Diddy's three sons, Justin Combs, Christian Combs, and Quincy Brown, were constantly present in the courtroom alongside Diddy's mother, Janice Combs. But on this Monday morning, the first day of the second week of the trial, they were all missing, including Diddy's mother. Now, at the end of cross-examining Dawn Richard, Nicole Westmoreland seemed to basically imply that a possible motivation for Dawn Richard's testimony against Diddy, as well as filing a lawsuit against him, was due to bitterness. Nicole asked Richard about her attempts to work with Diddy after she left Bad Boy Records, because again, she was only part of Diddy Dirty Money from 2009 to 2011. So she asked Dawn Richard if she was upset about not being signed as a solo artist to the label. Dawn Richard responded that she quote-unquote didn't care about that. Nicole said, "You were trying to succeed for a long time." And Dawn Richard said, "I have succeeded." Then Dawn Richard explains why her accounts of stories over time may have some missing details. She says, "Every day gets easier to remember certain things. I try my best to do it to the best of my abilities." Of course, remember, these events are taking place 15 years ago, right? So it's kind of hard to have the exact perfect memory of what went down. Sometimes you forget some details, sometimes some details get mixed up. It definitely makes sense. But there are a lot of holes here that we didn't see nearly as much of in Cassie's testimony. And now during the government's redirect of Dawn Richard, where they start questioning her, they asked Dawn if she had quote-unquote any doubt about whether Diddy dragged Cassie up the stairs in 2009 after striking her for allegedly not cooking his eggs fast enough. Dawn Richard said, "No doubt." She had no doubt about hearing glass breaking as it was being thrown from Diddy. And she had quote-unquote no doubt about a meeting Diddy allegedly held the next day with Dawn Richard and another bandmate to warn them to stay silent about everything they saw. So again, remember in week 1, Dawn Richard had said after the frying pan egg incident, someone had told her to stay silent about these things because people could go missing. At the time, we didn't know specifically who she was talking about, but it was actually Diddy who had said that to her. So Dawn Richard, who earlier said her initial recollections of the stories were hazy because she was actively trying to forget them at the time, she also explains why she had reached out to Diddy after leaving Bad Boy. One time was because she was trying to rekindle a relationship with the choreographer Lorianne Gibson, who Dawn Richard said advised her to reach out to Diddy first. And as for Richard reaching out to Diddy to reunite Diddy Dirty Money, she said she did so to quote-unquote help a friend, which was the former bandmate of Diddy Dirty Money, Kalena Harper. Dawn Richard said Kalena was having a hard time, so Dawn reached out to Diddy to try to potentially reunite Diddy Dirty Money in hopes of making more clean money. But Dawn says, "I didn't want to go back. It wasn't good. I didn't want it." So then Diddy's defense attorney, Nicole Westmoreland, wrapped up Dawn Richard's time on the stand Monday morning by challenging Dawn's assertion that she didn't personally want to return to Diddy Dirty Money, the group. She asked Dawn if she understood reuniting would mean spending substantial time with Diddy, including touring with him. Because of course, right, Diddy's defense is trying to paint the picture that if Dawn really thought Diddy was such a violent monster, why would she want to go back to spending tons of time with him, whether it's in the studio or going on tour? Then they redirect the attention to Dawn Richard's lawsuit that she filed against Diddy in September 2024. When Dawn Richard said she hoped for justice as a result of filing the lawsuit, Nicole, Diddy's defense attorney, asked whether money was a part of that justice. Basically, was she financially incentivized to sue? Because Dawn Richard's complaint outlined financial grievances and included the claim that she is owed more than $3 million in unpaid wages and royalties from Diddy. And that wraps up Dawn Richard's testimony, and the government now calls for its next witness, Cassie's old friend, Carrie Morgan. Carrie and Cassie cut each other off in 2018 after an alleged incident in which Diddy had attacked Morgan with a wooden hanger. So Carrie is asked about Cassie, and she says she lost her confidence big time after her 11-year relationship with Diddy. She lost her spark. She says that she saw Diddy hit Cassie, pull her hair, kick her, push her, and she names 2 violent attacks from Diddy towards Cassie, once at Diddy's house that he was renting in Hollywood Hills and another time in Jamaica. Carrie described seeing Diddy push Cassie when the pair were in a bedroom in the California home. She couldn't recall the date, and she said that Cassie did quote-unquote nothing in response. Carrie said she yelled at a security guard that she was standing next to, a man named Ruben, to do something. The guard made it clear that he wasn't going to do anything, according to Carrie. Afterward, Carrie Morgan had said she and Cassie left the house and hid behind the steps at a neighbor's house as Diddy and a security guard searched for them. Carrie described another altercation between Diddy and Cassie in Jamaica in 2013. Carrie said that after Cassie went to the bathroom, Diddy complained that she was taking too long and sought her out. A few minutes later, Carrie said she heard Cassie screaming, sounds that Carrie would describe as terrifying. Carrie said that she then saw Diddy dragging Ventura, aka Cassie, by the hair. Then Carrie tells the jury how she saw Cassie in 2016 after she was attacked in the Intercontinental Hotel in LA. Of course, that's where the security camera footage came out that we were talking about from week 1. And that was, of course, when Cassie was trying to leave a freak off with Diddy. And it was a short time after the incident where Carrie had spoken to Cassie and saw her. Cassie had returned home in rough shape, according to Carrie. And at the time, Carrie was staying at Cassie's apartment. And she said Cassie had her hoodie over her head and she was kind of slumped and just dropped her bags. And then she pulled her hoodie back and she had a black eye. About a half an hour after Cassie's arrival to the house, Carrie said Diddy began banging on the front door with a hammer and Cassie appeared numb. Carrie said, I don't think she cared if he came in and unalived her. Then the U.S. attorney questioned Carrie about the conversations that she had with her former best friend Cassie. Carrie said that she would sometimes tell Cassie to leave Diddy. Cassie would say that she quote-unquote couldn't. Carrie recalled, because of her job, her car, her apartment, Diddy controlled everything. She would have lost all her livelihood. Carrie also said that Cassie didn't really have many friends at the time, and that Carrie was the only one of those friends who was not employed by Diddy. So all of Cassie's other friends were employees of Diddy. Carrie said she noticed that Cassie would feel more positive about her relationship with Diddy after spending time with these other people who were employed by Diddy. To quote her, she said, you could tell they were convincing her that it was okay. Diddy allegedly attacked Carrie in 2018 with a wooden hanger during a fit of rage over another relationship that Cassie was having at the time. Carrie told the jury about the incident that appears to have led to the end of her long friendship with Cassie. She said, I had a concussion, I was dizzy, I vomited a few times. Afterward, Carrie said Cassie approached her to sign a non-disclosure agreement on Diddy's behalf, and Carrie did sign it in exchange for $30,000. Carrie did not speak to Cassie again after that transaction. And then after a lunch break, it's now time for Diddy's lead counsel, Mark Agnifilo, to lead a cross-examination of Carrie Morgan. Mark starts the cross-examination by calling up a photo that was taken during Don Richard's testimony earlier this morning. The photo shows Cassie standing next to Don Richard and Kalena Harper at a festival in Central Park. Earlier, of course, Don Richard testified that she had seen Diddy assault Cassie that same day that the photo was taken. So Mark asked Carrie Morgan, who used to be friends with Cassie, if she recognized the woman in the photo. Carrie said she only recognized Cassie. Mark then asked Carrie about Cassie's modeling career, her ex-boyfriends, and whether or not she was jealous of Diddy's ex-partner, Kim Porter. During this questioning, Diddy could be seen passing a note to his lawyer, Tenny Grigaros, who passed it down to Mark, who was, of course, cross-examining Carrie. Now, Carrie discusses the Intercontinental Hotel incident once again, saying that she didn't witness the abuse herself and that Cassie had covered for Diddy. And according to her testimony, she said, cops arrived at Cassie's apartment after she was attacked at the Intercontinental Hotel, but when they asked what happened, Cassie said nothing. She didn't respond. They asked for her license. She said she didn't have it. Then Mark pressed Carrie Morgan about the end of her 17-year friendship with Cassie in 2018. Both Carrie and Cassie testified that their relationship ended shortly after Diddy allegedly attacked Carrie with a wooden hanger, and Mark asked Carrie to recount her last meeting with Cassie, which took place at a pizza shop in West Hollywood. Of course, that's when Cassie had offered Carrie $30,000 in exchange for signing an NDA agreement, and the two haven't spoken since the deal was made. Cassie had also testified last week that she had paid part of that $30,000 along with Diddy. Mark then presses Carrie on why this incident was enough to end such a close relationship. Carrie said she quote-unquote drew the line at physical abuse, but she didn't offer much more when Mark had followed up about the lack of contact. She said, I don't know why Cassie hasn't reached out to me. I'm sure she doesn't have the same number. All in all, Carrie Morgan was described to be dispassionate during her testimony, speaking flatly and very matter-of-factly. She often declined to elaborate when she was prompted by attorneys, saying that she was unsure or couldn't recall certain conversations or detail. And that wraps up Carrie Morgan, Cassie's former best friend's testimony within this trial, and the government now calls its next witness David James, who used to work with Diddy as his personal assistant during the period that he was dating Cassie. David James testified that he applied to work for Diddy after seeing a New York Times story noting that Diddy was seeking a personal assistant. James was hoping to break into the fashion industry at the time, according to him. David then describes an interaction that he had with the head of human resources at Bad Boy Records during the interview process for the job. David said that the human resources lady pointed to a picture of Diddy on the wall and told him, quote unquote, "This is Mr. Combs' kingdom. We're all here to serve it." He then describes his interview with Diddy as professional, at one point quoting a popular Diddy catchphrase, "Can't stop, won't stop," when he's talking about his work ethic. Diddy had liked that, according to David. He described Diddy as having a relatively unique rider when he stayed at hotels. A rider is a list stipulating what a prominent guest would like in their room. Basically, when Diddy would check into new hotels, he would have a wish list, you could call it, of things that he would want in the hotel room, and David was in charge of preparing those lists and getting the items for Diddy's hotel stays, as well as green rooms and music venues. Aside from calling these riders or these wish lists relatively unique, he didn't elaborate on what was in the riders. He also describes being told by Diddy's various security guards to quote-unquote stay in his lane when he would ask too many questions. David said he understood that to mean do the job I was hired to do, and only that job. In his testimony, David also said that he suggested to Cassie early in her relationship with Diddy that she should bail on the quote-unquote crazy party life that she found herself in with Diddy. David said that he and Cassie were outside smoking cigarettes during a trip to Miami with Diddy when she said, "Man, this lifestyle is crazy." And David agreed based on the grueling hours and travel schedule as a Diddy employee. So he asked Cassie, if it's so crazy, why don't you just leave? Cassie said, "I can't get out. Mr. Combs oversees so much of my life." David said that Cassie told him that she depended on Diddy for her career, her home, and her salary. David had said specifically, "I just didn't think she could easily leave." And that wraps up the first day of the second week of the Diddy trial, but now we get into day 2. Where things get a little bit more interesting. It starts off with them discussing the upcoming testimony of Regina Ventura, who is Cassie's mother. The testimony, according to the government, will focus on events that took place in December of 2011 when Cassie went home to Connecticut and shared details with her mom about Diddy's threats and physical abuse. If you guys don't recall, this was of course around the time when the altercation with Kid Cudi happened as well. Prosecutors want to ask Regina, Cassie's mom, about a demand for $20,000 that they say Diddy made to her. Diddy allegedly said that he had spent that amount on Cassie and he wanted to be compensated after she became involved with another man, most likely Kid Cudi. The government said it believes that the incident is quote-unquote strong proof of coercion, suggesting that Diddy was continuing to keep Cassie in his sphere when she was attempting to leave the relationship. The defense, Diddy's team, is not denying that Diddy demanded $20,000 from Cassie's mother, but his lawyers argue that the exchange was not relevant. Cassie's mom did wire the money to Diddy, but it was returned shortly afterwards. Diddy's team said no money ever left Ventura's possession on an ongoing basis. Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilio, said that he felt the anecdote introduces confusion without a great deal of purpose. But the judge says they would like to see Regina, aka Cassie's mom's testimony, before making a ruling that could limit her ability to talk about the $20,000 that she wired to Diddy in 2011, which again, the prosecutors are framing it as compensation for money that Diddy spent on Cassie, an exchange that speaks to the coercion and control that Diddy exercised over Cassie during their relationships. But now, David James, again, Diddy's personal assistant, or his former personal assistant, who was on the stand the day before, the assistant that we just discussed, who had asked Cassie why she didn't just leave the exhausting party lifestyle, he's back on the stand right now. He had said that he often worked 6 or 7 days a week, sometimes 20 hours a day, sometimes for weeks on end. Again, when he went in to interview for the job, the HR executive told him, "This is Diddy's kingdom. We are all here to serve it." The prosecutors have said that they hope to use David James's ongoing testimony to help establish their racketeering charge. Essentially, that Diddy used an organization of people to facilitate his alleged abuses. Remember at the beginning of this video, we said, in order for the prosecutors to find Diddy guilty of that RICO charge, they have to prove that he had an entire team who was paid to essentially maintain the operation of this criminal organization. They're hoping that his former assistant, David James's testimony, can prove that, essentially. David James then testifies that Diddy traveled around with a large supply of prescription and illegal drugs, including pills that were stamped with President Barack Obama's face on them. He also testified that Diddy would have hotel rooms stocked with 40 kinds of skincare products, a Jordan brand sweatsuit and applesauce, along with an assortment of drugs, baby oil, and lubricant. He then described the prep that he would do for Diddy's hotel rooms, saying that he was reimbursed by Bad Boy Entertainment for expenses such as medicine and snacks, but for certain supplies, the former personal assistant, David, had said, like baby oil, Astroglide, and condoms, he was told to be reimbursed by Diddy's security staff, who would pay him out in cash out of Diddy's Louis Vuitton bag. So essentially, when Diddy's old assistant, David James, would go out and buy, common things like snacks and medicine to stock up Diddy's hotel rooms, he would be compensated by Bad Boy Entertainment, aka the company that he worked for would pay him back whenever he would use his own money to buy these things for Diddy. But when it was certain other supplies like baby oil, condoms, Astroglide, etc., he would instead pay with his own money and then get paid back by Diddy's security, usually in cash from a Louis Vuitton bag that Diddy had. David also testified that Diddy had 3 firearms on his lap when he ordered members of his entourage to go to Mel's Diner in LA early one morning to confront Suge Knight. Diddy demanded that David James drive to the restaurant around 4 a.m. and then circle the block after they failed to spot Suge Knight's Cadillac in the parking lot. David testifies, "I remember thinking there's 3 firearms and 3 people in this car." Before the trip to the diner, Diddy's girlfriend at the time, Cassie, was crying and begging him not to leave his Los Angeles home. Cassie had previously told the jury that she was scared of what Diddy would do and begged him not to go. David James drove Diddy's Lincoln Navigator to the diner and recalled having a weird sense of calm on the drive, with Diddy and a security guard in the car. This part of the testimony may help support the prosecution's theory that Diddy had an army of enforcers who enabled his violent and illegal conduct. Before talking about Diddy's hotel rooms, the assistant David James had described a night in 2009 when Diddy entered his LA home in a rage over a blog post on a gossip site. David had said that he had the day off, but he was at Diddy's estate working on a quote-unquote research project for Diddy, looking up possible tattoos online for Diddy. David recalled that Diddy arrived home in the early morning hours after a night of clubbing, and he was upset over a blog post. Diddy, quote-unquote, beelined straight towards David and looked up David's search history on the computer that David had been working on. Diddy wanted to see whether David may have written the blog post. A few days later, David was given an assignment to deliver a meal from Roscoe's, quote-unquote, they made delicious fried chicken, according to David, and he was expected to deliver that to Cassie at the London hotel. Cassie had been there about a week, and when he arrived at the hotel, David said he was surprised to see one of Diddy's staff answer the door. David said, "I was expecting to see Cassie." And of course, this aligns with the testimony of Cassie that we reviewed in the first week of the trial, where Diddy had allegedly attacked her and then she had to recover for a few weeks in a London hotel. Then Diddy's defense jumps in and suggests that the Suge Knight incident didn't happen, at least not the way that David James had said it did. Defense lawyer Mark Agnifilio had asked David if he objected to going with Diddy to look for Suge Knight while Diddy was allegedly holding 3 firearms. Mark said, "You didn't say a thing?" "Respectfully, sir," David said, "you have someone with 3 firearms that close proximity. I didn't think I had the option to say anything." He did agree with Mark, though, that the incident was a quote-unquote radical departure from normal events during his time employed by Diddy. Now, Mark is fairly aggressive as he cross-examines David James, Diddy's former assistant, about his account of the incident involving Diddy and his rival Suge Knight. Mark's demeanor with James was remarkably different from his demeanor during his cross-examination of Carrie Morgan, where he periodically apologized for asking her certain questions. The defense, Diddy's defense, clearly did not want the jury to hear David's story. Earlier that morning, before the jurors even entered the courtroom, Mark Agnifilio, Diddy's defense attorney, had fought to have the testimony barred on the grounds that it was not relevant. The government persuaded the judge to keep the testimony, arguing that David's story supported their racketeering charge. Other notable moments from David James, Diddy's personal assistant's cross-examination, includes the fact that David said Diddy's security used to have a saying, "Do you know what rhymes with tired?" The answer was fired. Also, remember how one of the things on Diddy's wish list for his hotel rooms was applesauce? Well, according to Diddy's defense team, Diddy actually likes applesauce on his cheeseburgers, and that's why he requested it in his hotel rooms. Listen, I understand the concept of salty and sweet. I could get down with a little, caramelized onions on my burgers, maybe some hot honey on some pizza, but applesauce on a cheeseburger? He might as well have used the baby oil on his cheeseburgers. Another weird curveball when David was getting cross-examined was the fact that Mark Agnifilio asked him if he ever choked Diddy's personal chef Jordan Atkinson, who is actually expected to also testify this week, so stay tuned for that. David had said that he didn't. He said he was annoyed with the chef seeming to tell him what to do, and he grabbed one of her wrists and told her to stay in her effing lane. Diddy had asked David what happened, and he told David, "You can't be putting your hands on women. You do it again, I'm gonna have to let you go." He told David to write the chef a note and give her a gift. The gift ended up being a blunt that David rolled. The prosecutors then asked David if he ever saw Diddy get violent with the chef Jordan. And he replied that there was an incident at Diddy's New Jersey home. He said that Diddy instructed David to file a police report saying that the chef was the aggressor and hit Diddy first. David, the assistant, said he didn't want to make a fake police report, so instead he drove around New Jersey for an hour before returning to Diddy's home, where he lied and told his boss that the report had been filed. And that's the end of the testimony from Diddy's personal assistant, David James. We now get Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, who's about to take the stand. And on a side note, between the applesauce on the cheeseburgers, the chef incident with the blunt, the catchphrases from Diddy's team, like "you're either tired or you're fired," or pointing at the picture of Diddy and saying this is his kingdom, we're here to serve him, or the 20-hour workdays, 6 to 7 days a week, sometimes multiple weeks on end, this could be easily the weirdest testimony we've heard by far, maybe second to the S-worker who said that he was so geeked up on MDMA that he ran around Times Square handing out $100 bills to bums on the street. So Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, takes the stand and says that she took out a home equity loan in 2011 for $20,000 to satisfy a shakedown demanded by Diddy because she believed that he was going to harm her daughter, Cassie. The younger Cassie, who testified against Diddy last week, visited her mother's home in Connecticut for the holidays that year with visible bruises on her body, and her mother, Regina, took photographs of the injuries that were shown to the jury during Cassie's testimony. Regina said, "I was scared for my daughter's safety." Of course, as we reviewed before, the jurors had previously heard testimony that Diddy was livid that Cassie had been dating Kid Cudi, and because Diddy considered it an insult for her to see another hip-hop celebrity, he asked for $20,000 from Cassie's mom for money that he had spent on Cassie. So she wired $20,000 to Diddy, and Diddy returned it about 4 to 5 days later. Diddy also allegedly threatened to release explicit videos of Cassie, according to her mother's testimony, and Regina said that she received an email threatening to release the S-tape and felt physically sick. Just like with Cassie's testimony, her mother had said that her daughter first told her about Diddy being physically abusive in December of 2011 when she disclosed it in an email as she traveled home to Connecticut for Christmas. After Cassie arrived, her mother said that she took photos of the bruising on her daughter's backside, her thigh, and the back of her shoulder. The same photos that were shared in court during Cassie's testimony last week. Cassie said that she was injured during a meeting with Diddy shortly after he learned that she was dating another musician, Kid Cudi. And that was all that Cassie's mother testified about. Diddy's defense team didn't feel there was a need to cross-examine her, so then we get the next witness called to the stand. Sheree Hayes, 51 years old, and a male exotic dancer from Harlem whose stage name was The Punisher. Cassie testified, of course, last week that The Punisher participated in freak-offs with her and Diddy, and he said he was hired for the first time in 2012. He's bald, muscular, wearing a black suit and tie. He also speaks with a bit of a lisp. He explained that his Punisher nickname was given to him as a teen and was inspired by his style of play on the basketball court. He has a website for his exotic dancing services called getpunished.com. The Punisher says that his first freak-off with Cassie and Diddy took place in 2012, and he initially thought he had been hired to perform a dance for a small group of friends. The Punisher says he was greeted by Cassie, who he didn't know at the time, and was asked to perform a scene for her and her husband, a man who he now understands was Diddy. Diddy sat at the table, naked except for a veil, similar to what a Muslim woman would wear, according to the Punisher, and he says he was instructed to have no communication with Diddy at the time during this freak-off. So he testifies that Diddy would periodically give instructions during the freak-off, telling Cassie to position her body a certain way or to move the lights. The Punisher says he was given $800 on arrival, then was asked if he wanted to quote-unquote finish. He declined, saying he wanted to keep things professional, and he was given an additional $1,200. The Punisher says he didn't recognize Diddy or Cassie during their first encounter, but learned their identities when he was booked for another freak-off session, this time at the Essex House in New York. When he turned on a TV in the hotel room while waiting for the session to start, a welcome screen appeared reading, "The Essex House would like to welcome Mr. Sean Combs." So this man, because Diddy was masked up in this veil similar to a Muslim woman, did not know during the freak-offs that it was actually Diddy. The only way he found out was during a separate freak-off at the Essex Hotel when he turned on the TV and it said, "Welcome, Diddy." And the Punisher says, "Ironically, I was a fan." He said he later looked at Diddy's Instagram account and recognized Cassie in the photos. So he didn't know who Cassie was, he only realized who it was once he knew that Diddy was a part of this freak-off, went on Diddy's Instagram and saw a picture of Cassie. The Punisher estimated that he participated in 8 to 10 of the freak-offs, which took place only in New York. He added that they could sometimes take multiple days, and they typically began at around 2 to 3 a.m. Freak-offs were fairly predictable affairs. According to the Punisher, the rooms were always dimly lit with electric candlelight and sheets covering the furniture. The participants would start seated on a couch and sometimes create a look by rubbing baby oil on each other, and this would sometimes be followed by oral or penetrative sex. Diddy would give the Punisher and Cassie directions, and the Punisher said that Cassie seemed to seek cues from Diddy and sometimes winked or sighed in response to the instructions. He recalled how one time Diddy threw condoms on the couch and said he was quote-unquote ready to see them F. Another time, Diddy dropped a stack of money on the bed as the Punisher and Cassie had sex, and he expressed his approval. So he was watching them essentially during the freak-off. Under cross-examination by Diddy's attorney, Xavier Donaldson, the Punisher said that he began his exotic dancing career on Labor Day weekend in 1995. He said, "I'm coming up on a big anniversary," I guess the 30 years of exotic dancing. He said he has danced for hundreds of thousands of ladies, and he also testified that he wrote a self-help book about his experiences with ED. And it's called In Search of Freezer Meat. The Punisher said the book details his journey trying to cure his ED condition and that he quote-unquote tried to make light of the issue to be relatable. "What's harder than freezer meat?" the Punisher said, explaining the book's title during a cross-examination. The Punisher also said that he described his encounters with Diddy and Cassie in the book, but he didn't use their real names. He characterized them as powerful, rich, and he said he sensationalized their recap in his book to make it an entertaining story. Now, here is where he possibly contradicted his earlier testimony where he said that Cassie sometimes winked or sighed at Diddy's instructions during the freak-offs because under cross-examination, the Punisher said that he would not have S with Cassie during the sessions if he thought that she was uncomfortable. Diddy's lawyer asked, "There were no cues about any discomfort, right? That's based on your 25 years experience about doing exotic dances for thousands of women." The Punisher said, "Correct," basically implying that Cassie did not seem uncomfortable during the sessions. Then the government comes in to question the Punisher further, saying, "What made you think Cassie was enjoying herself?" The Punisher said it was because he would perform oral sex on Cassie, and then she would scoot towards him as if she was ready for the full thing. And then he said that Cassie looked to Diddy as if to get his consent, and Diddy would respond with, "Go ahead, enjoy yourself." So the Punisher says, "I assumed it was an enjoyable moment." Then he's asked if there were any other indications of Cassie enjoying herself, such as noises, or if the Punisher ever had interactions with Cassie outside of the freak-offs. the Punisher said that he didn't. But he also said, I had no reason to believe Cassie wasn't engaged. And alright, that definitely takes the cake for the strangest testimony throughout this trial so far. But now we get a little change of pace. The government calls in their next witness, Gerard Gannon, a special agent with Homeland Security. This special agent was tasked with planning the federal raid on Diddy's mansion on Star Island in Miami. He testified on that day that the raid involved many more agents than usual due to the massive size of the property and the possibility of armed security. Diddy's home was searched around 3 or 4 p.m. It's not a very common time to do a search of this nature, but the special agent said, we thought it would be best to wait until Diddy and his family had left the house. The Homeland Security special agent now gives an account of the planning and search of Diddy's Miami mansion in March of 2024. The government asks about specific details of the raid, such as the use of an armored vehicle to push open the gate to the home. And he's then asked by prosecutors to walk through some of the items that he's found in the raid of Diddy's massive Star Island home last year. He testified that in the main bedroom's closets, federal agents found parts of an AR-15 rifle and corresponding accessories such as red dot optic plates, which help the firearm user be more accurate. Photos from the same bedroom showed a column of shelves with AR-15 components, as well as platform high heels, S-toys, baby oil, lubricant, and lingerie. Firearm parts with serial numbers that had been defaced were recovered from Diddy's bedroom, and the special agent said that defacement of the serial numbers typically occurs when the firearm holder wants to prevent law enforcement from tracing the weapons. He also reviewed the 2 firearm magazines that he said contained 19 rounds and 10 rounds of ammunition. And that wraps up day 2 of week 2 of the Diddy trial, but as we get into day 3, we get this special agent back on the stand. And the government had said that they recovered 3 cell phones from Diddy's Miami mansion, the same one that the special agent talked about raiding. These were found tucked into a tall black Balenciaga boot, and there was also a Gucci bag with traces of horse tranquilizer and white powder. The Gucci bag also contained an array of other substances, amongst them a small bag of white powder labeled DBL Wash, a clear plastic Ziploc containing pink MDMA tablets, and another bag containing 3 orange MDMA tablets with the Tesla logo stamped on them. So he's got Tesla pills, Barack Obama pills, and horse tranquilizer. Several of these items were presented to the court in their evidence bags, which the special agent cut open with a pair of scissors and held them up for the jury to see. The prosecutors also flashed a picture of Diddy's closets that showed boxes full of baby oil and lubricant, also 2 rubber ducks in those boxes. There's also 2 large evidence bags full of baby oil and lube that were also shown to the jury. In those evidence bags contained around 31 bottles. However, these were not from Diddy's Miami Star Island mansion. Instead, they were from a separate raid. It's also important to note we're now on day 3 of week 2's trial, and this is the first day this week that 2 of Diddy's sons, Justin Combs and Christian King Combs, have entered the courtroom. And now we get Dawn Hughes on the stand. Dawn Hughes is a forensic psychologist, and she said she's there to testify on 4 main topics: why people stay in relationships despite domestic violence, how they cope, how they disclose and talk about abuse, and how traumatic events affect memory. She said, no victim wants to be abused, but it's very common for people to stay in abusive relationships. Dawn Hughes is what's called a blind expert, meaning that she doesn't know anything about the main figures in this case, including Cassie and Diddy. She's just here to talk about the effects of abusive relationships. So she says a trauma bond can form between a domestic abuser and their victims. Of course, the government is hoping that this testimony will help jurors make sense of Cassie's behavior with Diddy, specifically staying with him throughout all this abuse. As we reviewed with Cassie's cross-examination with Diddy's lawyers, they pressed her about warm and loving text exchanges between Diddy and Cassie and highlighted several messages in which Cassie appeared to propose freak-offs. So Dawn Hughes, a psychologist, testified that there is almost always love, attraction, and companionship in abusive relationships. She said a combination of highs and lows can create a powerful bond between an abuser and their victim, who can feel entrapped in a relationship not just because of physical violence, but also psychological abuse, surveillance, or financial control. Abuse is especially difficult and isolating for victims of domestic violence because these acts are more personal and cause a lot of shame. She said, if you can't talk about what's happening in the relationship, then you can't get help. And of course, if you remember in Cassie's testimony last week, she told her mother that Diddy had physically abused her, but couldn't bring herself to talk about the S abuse for a long period of time. The psychologist is now testifying that it's common for people in abusive relationships to cope through substance abuse, using narcotics to get rid of memories and alleviate fear and anxiety. She said victims often hedge when they describe their experience and might only open up after they have left the relationship or sought professional help. And it's not unusual that traumatic memories are forgotten or recovered in pieces. She said, "You're not going to get all the information in one sitting." This might also help to apply to last week's testimony from Don Richard, who had been actively trying to forget memories of Diddy abusing Cassie, just calling it simply a bad time. The psychologist elaborated on trauma memories, saying that they can be triggered by context and specific sensory clues, such as sights, smells, and sounds. She noted that trauma victims may suppress these memories. She also testified that an abuser's authority and status can affect if and when a victim comes forward. She said, "If you're going against someone who has wealth, access, and privilege, a victim might think, 'Who's going to protect me?'" Diddy's lawyers jump in with a counter-argument and say, "You agree that a psychologist cannot give an opinion when a psychologist has not assessed that specific person, right? Because of course, again, Dawn Hughes is a blind witness. She doesn't know Cassie or Diddy." So the psychologist did acknowledge that there was some controversy about this in her field, but, quote unquote, "we can make some conclusions based on records." Prior history. It's also important to note that Dawn Hughes, the psychologist, was an expert witness for the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial in 2022 before she testified Wednesday about the behavior of domestic abuse victims in the Diddy and Cassie case. Johnny Depp was suing Amber Heard, his ex-wife, for defamation over a 2018 op-ed that she wrote in the Washington Post. Dawn Hughes, the psychologist in both cases, had testified that she evaluated Amber Heard and diagnosed the actress with post-traumatic stress disorder related to physical and psychological violence during the marriage. But she says she has not worked with anyone in the Diddy trial, including Cassie. She instead spoken generally about why victims might stay in their relationships and cope, topics that she also spoke about in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. In that Johnny Depp-Amber Heard trial, Johnny Depp was awarded $15 million in damages, while Amber Heard was awarded $2 million in her counterclaim. And now we get George Kaplan called to the stand. He was another former assistant to Diddy who quit after seeing Diddy physically attack Cassie. That's at least according to Cassie's earlier testimony. So this assistant, George Kaplan, said that he worked 80 to 100 hours a week as Diddy's assistant. His days would typically start around 9 a.m. when he made sure Diddy's chef was ready to make breakfast, and his days ended anywhere between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Kaplan said that his duties included carrying Diddy's bags and making sure they contained, quote-unquote, everything he might need. He testified that these necessities included an iPad, snacks, or drugs. He said Diddy threatened to fire him about once a month, the first time when he was sent on an errand to get a gallon of water in a BPA-free bottle, and finding none at Whole Foods, he instead brought back a 2 half-gallon bottle that was BPA-free. Another one of George Kaplan's duties as Diddy's assistant was to set up hotel rooms. Kaplan testified that he would typically get a few hours' notice from Diddy himself or his chief of staff, Christina Coram. He said that he would set up rooms in LA, Miami, and New York, stocking them with candles, Astroglide, and baby oil. Diddy's hotel rooms were booked under the alias Frank Black. Of course, we heard this from Cassie's testimony as well, that was an alias that Diddy went by. And the assistant said this was a play on the late rapper Biggie's nickname, Frank White. So Diddy was Frank Black, Biggie was Frank White. Kaplan told the jury, "My understanding was that he would have guests or a female partner in these hotel rooms. During the hotel stays, the assistant George Kaplan would courier food, clothes, and drugs that his boss Diddy had asked for, and he mentioned that a bag with tons of different medication, including Advil, Tylenol, Wellbutrin, and horse tranquilizer was brought to the hotel rooms. I'm sure there were other things," Kaplan said, but he didn't go into detail. And that wraps up day 3 of week 2 for the Diddy trial. We will now touch on the final day of the Diddy trial so far, which is day 4 of week 2, where we hear from none other than Kid Cudi, who takes the stand. This is arguably one of the darker testimonies that we've heard thus far. So let's lock in and unpack it. So early in the morning on day 4 of the second week of the Diddy trial, before the jury had entered the room, The court debated the state of mind that Kid Cudi's dog might be in. You'll understand that very shortly, but the judge and lawyers discussed what Kid Cudi may talk about during his testimony, particularly as it relates to the impact that a home break-in, allegedly orchestrated by Diddy, had on Cudi's dog. Diddy's attorney, Brian Steele, didn't want any testimony from Kid Cudi about the dog being quote-unquote traumatized by the burglary. The judge said he's not going to testify about what the dog thought. This made the court laugh. Brian Steele, who smirked at the exchange, stressed that he didn't want the dog lovers on the jury to be swayed by the testimony. Brian Steele said, "The dog was never the same. The dog urinated on the floor. Why do we need that?" The judge said, "Mr. Steele, I hear you." And he ruled that Kid Cudi can talk about the immediate impact that the burglary had on the dog, but cannot talk about the long-term consequences to the dog. Unfortunately, the dog is no longer with us, said the prosecutor, and she added that she was happy to limit Kid Cudi's dog-related testimony to the immediate aftermath of the incident. So of course, if you guys remember from Cassie's testimony last week, Diddy had threatened to blow up Kid Cudi's car after he found out that Cassie and Kid Cudi were dating. Shortly afterwards, Kid Cudi's car was set aflame while Diddy was out of the country. The judge said that Kid Cudi cannot speculate and say Diddy committed arson and burglary, but he can share his thoughts about why he called the meeting with Diddy. But before we get into Kid Cudi's testimony, first, George Kaplan, Diddy's former assistant, is back on the stand, and he recalls an incident between Diddy and Cassie on a private jet. Kaplan told the jury that he accompanied Diddy and Cassie and members of Diddy's security team on a flight to Las Vegas in 2015. He said he heard glass shatter behind his seat. He looked over his shoulder and saw Diddy standing over Cassie, holding a whiskey tumbler over her. Cassie was lying with her back on the ground, her legs extended as though to create space between the two of them. He said there was tremendous commotion. He turned his face away and heard Cassie call out, "Isn't anybody seeing this?" And the assistant couldn't remember what Diddy was saying, but recalled that he sounded angry. The assistant said that he did nothing amid the crashing and chaos. The security did nothing either. Diddy told Cassie to stay at the back of the plane. He said that Diddy went to the front of the plane and no one went back to check on Cassie. The assistant exhaled heavily when asked about why he did nothing when he saw Diddy's violence towards Cassie on the private jet. He said, "I was 23 years old. All I wanted to do was have a great job in the entertainment industry." At the time, he couldn't believe his good fortune was for working for such an icon, and he was concerned that speaking out could jeopardize Diddy's well-being. In another incident, the assistant testified that he got a call on the intercom at Diddy's LA home in 2015 to come to the bedroom. He said he saw Cassie on the bed, clearly upset with a bruised eyebrow and forehead. The assistant said he walked past Cassie to Diddy, who was in the bathroom. He said Diddy asked him to pick up, quote-unquote, several over-the-counter remedies, including witch hazel, and the assistant testified that he used Diddy's corporate credit card to purchase the items, which he understood would be mixed together as an anti-swelling agent. The assistant said, "I'm a young man. This is a god among men. He didn't just push me to my deepest depths. He took me to depths that I didn't know I had. He actually helped me grow as a man." Several people in Diddy's inner circle have expressed a cult-like adoration of the Bad Boy Records founder during the trial. They've described him as an infectious vibe, attractive, and alluring. The assistant Kaplan, who is testifying now, said that he quit working for Diddy after witnessing Diddy abuse his longtime girlfriend Cassie, as well as another woman that Diddy had been seeing for several years. Kaplan finally quit his dream job working for Diddy in 2015 after he saw Diddy attack another one of his girlfriends. Kaplan said he was staying in Diddy's guest house in Miami at the time, and late one night he said he saw Diddy throwing green apples, he wasn't sure if they were real, very hard at a woman named Gina. She was trying to shield herself with her arms. The assistant said he was later called to Diddy's bedroom to bring a medicine bag. The mood was tense, and Gina was standing in the corner of the room with Diddy seemingly on edge. Later still, he heard a woman screaming at the front gate of Diddy's estate, along with male voices that he believed to be Diddy's security team. When he was questioned by the U.S. attorney about why he didn't do anything to intervene in this Miami incident, Kaplan repeated that he was young and ambitious at the time. "I thought it might be normal," he said. Recounting these events, Kaplan kept shifting in his chair, crossing his arms and looking at the floor or drawing his hand across his face. That attack on Gina proved to be the quote-unquote final straw. "I was not aligned or comfortable with the physical behavior that I had been seeing pieces of. And so after that, he quit." And now we get Kid Cudi, who is taking the witness stand. Kid Cudi arrived to the courtroom Thursday morning wearing a white shirt, black leather jacket, and jeans, and the rapper walked in the courtroom smoking a cigarette. He took the stand shortly after walking in. They claim that it's unusual for a witness in federal court to dress so casually, but in my opinion, this is a pretty dope outfit. So of course, Cassie testified in week 1 that Diddy physically abused her during her brief relationship with Kid Cudi, and in December 2011, when Cassie was not in the greatest place with Diddy, she was secretly dating Kid Cudi, and when Diddy found out about the relationship by searching through her burner phone during a freak-off, he lunged at her with a wine bottle opener between his fingers. She escaped, retreating to her room in a different hotel. The next day, of course, Cassie went to Diddy's house in Los Angeles to try to make amends, and Diddy threatened to release freak-off videos of her and said he would have someone hurt her and Kid Cudi physically. As she left, Diddy allegedly attacked her, kicking her in the back and leaving her with bruises. She testified that she stayed at her parents' home for the holidays and that Kid Cudi visited her for 3 or 4 days. By the time he left, Cassie said she had broken up with Kid Cudi because of the danger and uncertainty of what could happen if they continued to see each other. At one point, Cassie had testified that Diddy told her that Kid Cudi's car would be blown up while they were out of the country and that he wanted Kid Cudi's friends to see it. Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway around February of 2012, 2 months after that. A representative for Kid Cudi had confirmed to the media that the car did combust around that time. Cassie had said in court that when Kid Cudi later asked Diddy about his car at a meeting between the three of them, Kid Cudi answered, "What vehicle?" So Kid Cudi takes the stand and he's questioned by the prosecutor. They say, "What do you do for work?" Kid Cudi said, "I'm an actor and musician known as Kid Cudi." Then they show a picture of Cassie and Kid Cudi says, "We dated in 2011. They ask, "Who else was Cassie involved with?" Kid Cudi said, "Diddy." "What did you know about their status?" Kid Cudi said, "I believe that she and Diddy had some problems and they weren't dating anymore." So then he's asked, "In December 2011, did law enforcement respond to your home?" Kid Cudi said, "Yes, I had a break-in. Cassie called me at 5:30 or 6 a.m. She said Diddy had found out about us. She asked me to pick her up, so I did." The U.S. attorney asked, "Why?" Kid Cudi said, "Because she was worried." "What was her demeanor?" Kid Cudi said, "She was very stressed and worried." "And where did you go?" "To the Sunset Marquise. I thought it was safe, off the radar." "Who else did you speak with?" Kid Cudi is asked. Cudi said, "Capricorn Clark. She sounded near tears." "What did she say?" "She said that Diddy was in the car near my house." Then they asked, "You called Diddy?" Kid Cudi said, "I did. He said, 'I'm over here waiting for you.'" "And when you arrived, what did the outside look like?" Kid Cudi said, "Pretty normal." "Was there any security camera?" Kid Cudi said, "Yes, but I found out they weren't working. But the security cameras had been moved. Did you move them?" Cudi said, "No." They asked, "What did you see inside your home?" Kid Cudi said, "Gifts were open, some stuff I got from Chanel, and my dog was locked up in the bathroom." So essentially, law enforcement called Kid Cudi to say that there was a break-in in his house. Cassie then called him around 5:30 or 6 a.m. that day and said that Diddy had found out about them, and Cassie asked Kid Cudi to pick her up because she was worried. Cudi then spoke to Diddy's team, who had said that Diddy was in a car near Kid Cudi's house. So Kid Cudi called Diddy and he said, "I'm over here waiting for you." Then when Kid Cudi arrived back to his house, he realized that his security cameras had been moved and they weren't working. It wasn't him that moved them. And when he walked into his house, he saw that some of his gifts were open and that his dog was locked in the bathroom. So then he's asked, "How did you usually leave your dog?" Kid Cudi said, "I let him roam." "How long have you had your dog?" 3 years. "What changes were behavior of your dog after the break-in?" Kid Cudi said, "Jittery, on edge all the time." Remember, Kid Cudi can only testify about the short-term behavior of his dog after this break-in, not the long-term trauma that the dog suffered from, because that might sway the jury. Then Kid Cudi said, "I got back in my house and I called Diddy again. I was looking for him. I wanted to fight him, you know?" Then they asked, Did Diddy answer?" Kid Cudi said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm on my way." I thought to myself, and as he says that, Diddy's team interrupts him and calls for an objection. Then they ask a new question. "Kid Cudi, when you saw Cassie, how did she seem?" Kid Cudi said, "Depressed." "Did you see Cassie in Connecticut, her hometown, with her mother?" Kid Cudi said, "Yes, she needed it." "Did Diddy call you?" "Yes, a few times." "What did you say?" Kid Cudi said, "I didn't want to talk to him. He broke into my house, hurt my dog." "Did you and Cassie break up?" "Yes." "What about your car?" "My dog's babysitter called me and told me my car was on fire." "Where were you?" "At a relative of my ex-girlfriend's, aka Cassie's mom's house." "Where did you go?" "To my house." Then they show him pictures of his Porsche that was blown up, and he said, "That's the damage to my Porsche from the Molotov cocktail." "Who took these photos?" "Chip, a good friend and collaborator of mine," said Kid Cudi. What's depicted here? The hole that they cut in the roof of my car to put in the Molotov cocktail. What was your reaction to your car being set on fire? Kid Cudi said, what the F? And then they call for an objection. Was the damage on your car present before the call from your dog sitter that there was a break-in? Kid Cudi said no. Did you think it was accidental or intentional? Kid Cudi said it was intentional. Where did you last see Cassie? I saw her at the Soho house. I'd reached out to Diddy and said, let's talk. This is getting out of hand. Who was at the meeting at the Soho house? Kid Cudi said D-Rock, Diddy's security, and my manager. What was Diddy doing? Kid Cudi said he was standing there like a Marvel supervillain, and some people laughed. Kid Cudi said, Diddy said, we were homies. You know that is my girl. What did you say, Kid Cudi? Cudi said, I thought you guys had broken up. Then Diddy offered me water, twice. It was weird. Diddy was being so calm. What did Cassie say? Kid Cudi said, Cassie said that we had fallen in love. Things happened. What did you say to Diddy? I said, what about my car? And Diddy responded, I don't know what you're talking about. And I walked away. Did you see Diddy later? Kid Cudi said, I saw him a few years later, also at Soho House, and he said, I'm just sorry for all that BS. I was surprised. So I found peace with it. Then Brian Steele of Diddy's defense team comes in to ask Kid Cudi some questions about his Porsche in 2012. Steele said, you get a call about damage to your vehicle. Any surveillance photos? Kid Cudi said, no. My dog's babysitter did send me pictures of the damage. The DNA taken, are you aware it came back being a female? Did you know that there were DNA results on the car? Kid Cudi said, no. Cassie told you it was over, the relationship? Kid Cudi said, we just stopped talking. You told this honorable court and this jury that she played you. Kid Cudi said, yes. She played you and you had no clue? Kid Cudi said, no clue. In 2011, you went on a tour? Kid Cudi said, yes. 65 locations? Yeah. At the time, Diddy was an icon. Fair to say? Kid Cudi said, yes. You and Cassie had a S relationship? And they call for an objection. They switch the topic. Kid Cudi says, Diddy asked me about doing a song with Cassie in 2010. Do you believe that you left your front door unlocked, Kid Cudi? Kid Cudi said, yes. No forced entry? No. So his door was basically wide open for someone to come in and invade the house. Brian Steele says, there were only presents opened and the door in the bathroom. He says, I'm not belittling the situation. I'm just asking. You called Diddy? Kid Cudi said, yeah. Brian Steele says, was he calm? Diddy said, yes. Brian Steele said, you went to see him and you didn't think he had a firearm? Kid Cudi said, I couldn't call it. You're a strong person. That's how you categorize yourself? Kid Cudi said, yeah. This crossed the line. Cassie told you she was abused? Kid Cudi said, yes. But she never said she was S abused. True? Kid Cudi said she did not. You loved her. Tell me if I'm wrong. Kid Cudi said, I did love her. You got played by the same person who played Diddy, Cassie Ventura. So Brian Steele is here questioning Kid Cudi, trying to make it seem like Cassie played both Kid Cudi and Diddy. Then he says, in the 13 years since this incident, have you ever been notified in California that there has been any more action on this car fire? Kid Cudi said, no. Did Cassie have multiple phones? Kid Cudi said, I don't remember. Do you know what a burner phone is? Kid Cudi said, untraceable. The trespass, you call it a break-in. And Cassie told you that she had given your home address to Diddy. Kid Cudi said, yes. In the morning, she told me that. Brian Steele said, no more questions. Thanks. Then the prosecutor asked Kid Cudi, what did Cassie confide in you about the abuse? Kid Cudi said that he would hit her, sometimes kick. The day of the break-in, was she carefree? Kid Cudi said, no. What did Capricorn Clark tell you? Kid Cudi said, Diddy and an affiliate forced her into a car to come to my house. I called the police. How would you describe Cassie that day? Kid Cudi said, just really shook. Diddy finding out about us. Then they ask, how did your relationship or why did it end with Cassie? Kid Cudi said, the drama. It was getting out of hand. I wanted to give space. What drama? Well, the break-in, for my safety, her safety. Why did you have safety concerns? Because I knew Diddy was violent. The meeting at the Soho house. Diddy said, I don't know what you're talking about your car. Did you believe him? What was your understanding about that statement? Kid Cudi said, my understanding was that Diddy was lying. So of course, Diddy's defense is using Kid Cudi's testimony to question the character of the prosecution's star witness, Cassie, whose fling with the rapper allegedly incited Diddy to break into Kid Cudi's home and burn his car. And on cross-examination by Brian Steele, Kid Cudi of course said that when he and Diddy met to resolve their romantic dispute over Cassie, both men agreed that she had misled them into believing that she was unattached. That's of course when Brian Steele asked Kid Cudi, the person who played you and the person who played Diddy was Cassie. And Kid Cudi responded to that by saying, true. And after the cross-examination of Kid Cudi by Brian Steele, one of the prosecutors, Maureen Comey, had some very harsh words for Brian Steele. Of course, as we saw, Brian Steele had begun a line of questioning asking Kid Cudi whether he had physically intimate relationships with Cassie. And Steele should have alerted the court that he was going to pursue that type of line of questioning per the RAPE Shield guidelines. It was, quote unquote, frankly outrageous that it was asked in an open court, according to the prosecutor. And the judge actually reprimanded Brian Steele, saying that the questioning was out of bounds and that he should have told the prosecution that he was going to ask about Cassie and Kid Cudi's relationship. The judge said, "It's not state secrets. You need to at least let people know." And now Kid Cudi leaves the stand and makes room for Myla Morales, the next witness, who was a makeup artist who worked with both Diddy from 2000 to 2005 and Cassie from 2007 to 2018. Morales and Cassie were quite close, and Morales described herself as a big sister to Cassie. She said she would do Cassie's makeup for photo shoots, music videos, and fashion magazines. All of these photos that were taken would be checked by Diddy. Myla Morales said, "Sean always made sure the look was perfect." Then she recounts the story of one time when she was napping on a couch during the Grammy Awards weekend in 2010, when Diddy entered the suite in search of Cassie and shouting, "Where the F is she?" The makeup artist testified that Diddy charged inside and she heard yelling and screaming from the bedroom where Cassie was staying before Diddy stormed back out. The makeup artist said that Cassie left the bedroom distraught with a swollen eye and a busted lip and knots on her head. She said she took Cassie home in the morning and a physician friend looked at her injuries. The friend of Cassie and the makeup artist recommended that Cassie go to the emergency room, but Cassie declined. Then Diddy's defense attorney, Anna Estavio, the same one who cross-examined Cassie, had asked the makeup artist, Myla Morales, about the work that she had done for her friend Cassie. Estavio, Diddy's attorney, had also previously told the judge that she wants to demonstrate that Cassie had a thriving and vibrant career, possibly a strategy to undermine the government's argument that Diddy stifled Cassie's career as a pop star. So Estavio shows the court a number of photos of a music video with Cassie and rapper Wiz Khalifa. The music video is for Black and Yellow, as well as several magazine shoots. The makeup artist confirmed that she did Cassie's makeup on those projects. The cross-examination concluded with Myla Morales saying that she had a sisterly bond with Cassie. And of course, she previously testified that she feared for her life when she saw Cassie's injuries after Diddy struck her while the women were sharing a hotel room in 2010. She explained that her fear prevented her from talking to Diddy or calling police about the incident, and that neither Diddy nor his employees ever approached her about it. Then the government begins questioning its fourth witness on this day, Frederick Zamor, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, the general manager of L'Hermitage Beverly Hills, which is a luxury hotel. Zamor is being asked about the hotel records showing reservations that Diddy had made over the years. This was a regular hotel that Diddy had stayed at, and this general manager of the hotel had said that Diddy was considered problematic and likely to damage property. There was an internal note from the hotel on Diddy that said he always spills candle wax on everything and uses excessive amounts of oil. The same notes instructed employees to charge Diddy an extra $1,000 for expected damage and to mark the room, quote-unquote, out of order upon departure for deep cleaning. At one point, Diddy was charged $500 for an excessive amount of candle wax found on the carpet. So essentially, they had to shut down that room and mark it out of order after Diddy would check out, before he would even check in, because they expected that they would need to do deep cleaning of the room after he left. And they would also pre-charge him $1,000 before he even stayed there for that cleaning. And remember, Diddy always called himself Frank Black, which was an ode to Biggie's nickname, Frank White. And this general manager had testified that Diddy booked rooms under the alias Frank Black and Ryan Lopez. But staff knew his real identity and lodged him only in certain entry-level rooms. And in the notes, it also said that Diddy likes the rooms hot, with instructions to set the thermostat to 75 degrees before his arrival. Then we get another Homeland Security special agent on the stand, Joshua Cross, who specializes in computer forensics, and he says that he extracted data from multiple devices involved in this case. He laid out his methodology, which was quite technical, in detail for the jury. He gave a broad overview of what he found on the different laptops, signs of damage or being erased to factory settings, for example. And as the agent went over this, Diddy scooched his chair up to the defense table and opened up a notebook and started writing notes in it. So the prosecutors asked the special agent about the condition of the 3 laptops that he got I guess during a raid. One of them had a damaged hard drive, but he was still able to recover a lot of the data. Another laptop, which prosecutors said belonged to Cassie, had been reset to factory settings and showed a login screen for, again, the name Frank Black, which was the alias that Diddy used. The special agent said that he extracted text messages from these computers, but he didn't discuss any of the material recovered. And with that, court wraps up for the final day so far of this absolutely insane Diddy trial. With that, the judge speaks to the jury with anticipation that perhaps the jurors might meet family members and friends over the long weekend of Memorial Day. And the judge reiterated his order that they do not discuss the case. He rattled off a list of things that the jurors can do instead, like instead of talking about Diddy, they could go on a bike ride, watch the Knicks avenge their Game 1 loss. The judge emphasized that jurors cannot look up anything about the case, read any coverage of it, or talk to anyone involved in any way, shape, or form. And he said, if anyone breaks these rules, let me know. It's not tattling. But he quickly corrected himself. Actually, it is tattling, but the rules require them to do it. And with that wraps up the first 2 weeks of this horrifying trial, of course with the key witness Cassie Ventura gaining the strength to recap what is probably the most horrifying experiences of her entire life. And as this trial progresses, it's insane to ponder on two major things, right? Of course, the fact that Cassie's now husband has to sit there and watch her relive these 11 years of an absolute nightmare of a relationship with a man who initially hired Cassie's now husband to be her trainer early on. She's sitting on the stand in possibly the most vulnerable position a woman can be in, weeks away from delivering her third child, as she recounts some of the most stressful incidents that any human can ever endure. I can't emphasize enough the incredible strength that it must take to stare your trauma straight in the face and recap these horrifying experiences, not just to your loved ones, your friends, your family, your husband, but to a room of jurors judging you, U.S. federal prosecutors, and Diddy himself, the very man who caused all of this trauma. You also got to think about Diddy's 3 daughters, who are barely older than Cassie was when she first started dating Diddy. They now have to hear about the horrible actions that their father committed on women who were just as young as they were. All in all, this is an absolute nightmare of a case, with life on the line for Diddy as he awaits his fate. Is his defense correct in that Cassie wasn't just playing Kid Cudi, but also playing Diddy? This was just a toxic relationship, and he would have been found guilty for domestic abuse, but not for trafficking? Or is the government right, and this was all a massive criminal organization orchestrated by Diddy to control and coerce innocent victims into horrifying acts? Let me know what you guys think, and I will catch you in the next one.